The 1980s were not just a special time in basketball history, but many people would argue that it was the very golden age of the NBA, an era of resurgence, excitement, and fierce competition. The 1980s had no shortage of personalities. You had the flair and the glamour of Magic Johnson and the Showtime Lakers. You had the toughness and the blue-collar grit of Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. You had villains that people loved to hate, and the bad boy Detroit Pistons. There were jaw-droppers and showstoppers in Dominique Wilkins and Clyde Drexler. And of course, there was a young phenom making us reimagine what was possible in Michael Jordan. Beyond all the differences stylistically, there was also generally a completely different mindset and approach on a league-wide level. The 80s wasn't a time for coddling and excuses. You either beat the best or you got better in the off-season. You either made your teammates better or you watched your talent get wasted away on a mediocre team. You either played through injuries or you became an afterthought. You either brought the attitude and the physicality or you became a doormat to the men who wanted it more than you. In truth, the 80s were a completely different world than the NBA we experience in our present day. And today's video is a celebration of that era, as we delve into the rich battles and the incredible chapters of the NBA's pastime.
If you've ever been a part of NBA debates that involve discussions about the 1980s, then you know that people can be pretty divided on their opinions on the style and quality of basketball that came from that era, and even about what that era represented. As someone who loves that era of NBA basketball and who has personally watched hundreds of hours throughout my life of it, I feel like I can offer a bit of clarification on how people can accurately view this decade. I want to start by tackling several aspects about the decade and talk about what's true, what isn't true, and what you might have not known. First, we'll start with one of the most argued over topics, defense. The current perception of 80s defense depends on who you ask. If you ask a fan from an older generation, more often than not, they're going to tell you that defense was greater at that time, that back then, they played grown man defense. They would always punish each other physically back then, and nowadays, they can barely even touch each other. This is their narrative. But if you ask a lot of younger fans, they don't have to deal with the nostalgia bias, but they also have the disadvantage of not actually watching those games. Those younger fans will say things like defense was less advanced back then, and that it was easier to score and not as physical as advertised. There's even compilation videos on YouTube of bad defense from the 80s, where guys are given little resistance and minimal hustle and effort is on display. So what gives? You've got two different groups saying totally opposite things about a specific decade. Well, as usual, the truth lies somewhere in the middle and a little off to the side. Let's start with the facts and details we know about 80s basketball. Throughout the 80s, teams shot 48% from the field compared to today's 46%. In fact, in terms of field goal percentage, the 1980s were the most efficient decade in all of NBA history. I could break down all the statistical league averages in detail, but here's what you need to know. Today, the league is very high scoring. The 2000s were very low, the late 90s were very low, the early 90s were high, and the 1980s were very high. So immediately, at face value, it appears the 80s defensive era narrative has been pretty overblown, based on how many points they were scoring and how efficiently they were scoring. But what we need to understand was that the biggest contributing factor to this was the pace of play. The 1980s was some of the most fast-break, transition-heavy basketball the league has ever seen. In today's game, most of the very high scoring comes from the inflation of three-point attempts. But in the 80s, it was more due to the fact that most games looked like a track meet. The Showtime Lakers of the 80s were famous for this since Magic Johnson was always pushing the tempo. But it wasn't just them. Many teams played a fast break style, like the Denver Nuggets, who were notorious for their incredibly fast and potent offense, but also a terrible defense. The Pistons, despite their defensive perception, also ran the fast break a lot and could score a ton of points. And there were also teams like Phoenix, Dallas, Portland, and Philadelphia. So transition basketball was pretty much the norm in those days. And what do you get with a lot of fast breaks? Plenty of layups and dunks, which are easier opportunities. Easier opportunities equals a higher field goal percentage. The highest scoring game in NBA history actually came from this era, which was on December 13, 1983, when the Detroit Pistons defeated the Denver Nuggets in triple overtime, 186 to 184. These were the Pistons, who were known for their physicality, their Jordan rules, and their overall punishing defense. So how in the world could this defensively revered squad be involved in a game where the final score was in the 180s? It's starting to sound like this whole defensive era thing is just a huge myth. Well, we're not done yet. And that brings us to the next aspect that goes somewhat hand in hand with this one, physicality. One of the biggest influences in the different eras that people don't usually think of is the flagrant foul rule. Most of you know the details of the flagrant foul, but for those who don't, it's a foul where unnecessary roughness is used on another player. Many times it's called when there is a blow to the head or strong physical contact that was in no way a play on the basketball. Committing this flagrant foul can be devastating to the team that does it, because it results in either 1 or 2 free throws and maintained possession of the ball, and often an ejection of the player who committed the foul. This is a pretty good rule. It keeps players protected, it keeps players from unnecessary serious injuries, and it often keeps tense moments from escalating into really ugly situations. And this rule did not exist until 1990. That means that in the fullness of the 1980s, almost every hard foul was just considered a common foul. If this is the case, doesn't it make sense to hit the offensive player a little harder to make sure he doesn't get an and one? Doesn't it make sense to put a little extra on it if it means they think twice before attacking the basket next time? The games in the 80s weren't always played with this physically punishing nature, only when they needed to be, like for the Jordan rules or in the NBA playoffs. In the postseason, where every possession and every point counts, players would often exercise this freedom for the sake of trying to win the ball game. It wasn't that this generation of players was naturally more violent, it's that they were allowed to be. The truth is, just like modern basketball, there were players who played great defense, and there were players who played terrible defense. The key differences were the high-octane pace of play and the permissible hard fouls. In the 1980s, it was possible to have both a league where teams could score into the 120s and a league where games would become very physical and the style would change significantly. There was a term back in the day that was common among players, coaches, referees, and commentators: setting the tone. You don't hear it much anymore in today's game, but back then it was very important, and it essentially meant that they were coming out of the gates to start the game, setting the tone for the game's pace, style, and physicality. Nowadays, the game is much more consistent in terms of its style and physicality, because the rules have become much more clear on what is acceptable and what's not, what is permissible contact and what isn't. In the 80s, it was easier for players to control the game and more difficult for the referees to control the game, because pretty much anything goes. For example, it was common for teams like the Celtics and Pistons to be even more physical in matchups with the Lakers, trying to take them out of their finesse style of basketball. They came out of the gates, setting the tone, and oftentimes, it worked. The next aspect is athleticism. You've heard it, and I've heard it. The idea that players back then were slower, weaker, and smaller than modern-day athletes. Is it somewhat accurate? Probably. Is it also grossly exaggerated? Probably that too. In the past 10 years of modern NBA basketball, the average height of the NBA player is 6 foot 7 inches tall and weighs 220.7 pounds. In the 10 years of the 1980s, the average height was also 6 foot 7 inches tall and the average weight was 207 pounds. So although they stood just as tall side to side to one another, the major difference was the weight of the players at nearly 14 pounds less. Simply put, this difference was usually made up of muscle mass. Modern players have an advantage with modern training methods, eating habits, and fitness routines. Guys in the 80s were simply skinnier, but many of them were still very athletic and had lean muscle. They just overall looked a little less physically imposing than today's players. This has partially led some newer fans to criticize this era when they're looking at some of the most non-threatening and least athletic players of the 80s. They'll say things like the league was packed with part-time plumbers and accountants. I hate it when people say this though, because it's easy to take small samples and condemn an entire era for it. It's almost like when people think of the state of athleticism in 2020, they automatically think of Giannis. And when they think of the state of athleticism in the 90s, they think of Jeff Hornacek. The problem with that is that it's erring on an extreme example, and isn't a proper survey of the athleticism of the league as a whole at that time. Want another example? Picture 20 years from now. People are hating on LeBron James, saying he didn't play in a strong era of real athleticism, and here's their future arguments. How strong is LeBron's era in 2016 when he lost the MVP race to a guy who struggles to dunk a basketball? How strong could that era have been when one of the best players in the league was someone who was consistently overweight? In LeBron's era, he played against plumbers like J.J. Redick and Kelly Olynyk. How weak were the athletes in LeBron's era if a guy who was only 5 foot 9 inches tall could average nearly 30 points per game? Don't you guys see how ridiculous and biased these statements are? Although many of the statements are true to an extent, they're cherry-picking details and acting as if it's the complete picture. They're completely lacking context, but statements like these are usually just emotionally motivated agendas in order to build a negative narrative about a player that they don't like as much as their favorite player. People do this all the time with the 1980s. But when you look around the league in that era as a whole, you see guys who were incredible athletes like Dominique Wilkins, Kenny Skywalker, Michael Jordan, Daryl Dawkins, Charles Barkley, Gerald Wilkins, Julius Erving, Shawn Kemp, Xavier McDaniel, Hakeem Olajuwon, Karl Malone, James Worthy, Tom Chambers, Darrell Griffith, David Thompson, Terrence Stansbury, Clyde Drexler, Larry Nance, Dennis Rodman, Orlando Woolridge, David Robinson, Roy Hinson. Seriously, do I need to keep going? Many people are just too young or weren't watching at that time to know about a lot of the freakishly gifted athletes of the 1980s, just like how 20 to 30 years from now, many people won't know about many of the great athletes we watch in today's game. The final aspect is competition. I'll make this one quick, but since the 1960s when the Boston Celtics ruled the basketball world, the 1980s were the toughest era of competition in terms of how hard it was to break through and win a championship. That was because the 80s were, as I call it, the era of super teams. There was so much talent at the top of the league, and you had several dynasty-worthy rosters consistently duking it out. Part of that was how the league was rich with stars, but the other part was how there were only 23 teams in the league. Imagine today's NBA, and then we eliminate 7 of the teams, and then distribute the talent from those teams to the remaining 23 teams. Naturally, what would you get? A handful of super teams. This was essentially the NBA in the 1980s. Look around the teams of the league and who won championships in that decade. If you had just 1 or 2 stars on your team in that era, you're not winning a championship. You needed 3 or 4 and a deep bench just to even win 1 ring. With all this being said, am I saying that the 80s was the greatest era of basketball? Not necessarily, but it was a great era, with a crazy history, and with a fantastic collection of talent and athletes, and it certainly deserves your respect.
You left the bad blood on the court for the most part, but not with Laimbeer. You never really ever liked Laimbeer in any social situation.
No.
Yeah.
And it's because he was a dirty player.
Right.
Now, he had to do what he had to do, I understand that, but you take, like Ricky Mahorn, he'd hit you and all that, but he'd hit you, you know you're going to get hit.
Yeah.
But he didn't try to maim you.
Right.
Bill tried to hurt you.
Right.
And, he was one of them guys, you shoot a jumper, he'd try to slide his foot underneath your ankle so you twist your ankle. And that's why Parrish
Did he
always
really used to do that?
If you watch any of our old games, Parrish was always twisting his ankle against the Pistons. So one time I shot a jumper and Laimbeer did it to me, and I stepped on his foot, but I stepped on a high, didn't twist my ankle. I don't know, a quarter or 2 later, he was shooting that jumper. I slid mine in there. That's the last time he ever did it.
Really?
Yeah. But he was, he had to play the way he had to play, and we all understood that. But if you carry it too far, you carry it over the line, you got to protect yourself.
I'm on record saying that Bill Laimbeer of the Bad Boy Pistons is the dirtiest player in NBA history. This 6'10 center was a talented rebounder, enforcer, and even a solid stretch 5. But more than anything, he was known for his tenacity and antics on the basketball court. It was bad enough that this was Laimbeer's reputation and actions on the court. But what made it even more aggravating to many spectators was the fact that he reveled in it. It was abundantly clear to everyone who watched him play that Laimbeer delighted in the fact that he was the supervillain of the NBA. The Bad Boy Pistons were hated league-wide for their physical defense that usually included many cheap shots. Although Isiah Thomas was the face of the Pistons' offense, there's no question that Laimbeer was the one who was the face of the notorious defense. This devious persona earned him some wicked nicknames, like the Prince of Darkness, His Heinous, and Freddy, inspired by the horror-based character Freddy Krueger. Those were not the only unflattering names that he was called, though. In 1989, after the Pistons had eliminated the Bulls from the playoffs for the second straight season, Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the Bulls, was very unhappy with the Detroit big man. Not only had Laimbeer brought his usual physicality and antics to the series, but early on in Game 6, he elbowed Scottie Pippen in the head, which resulted in a concussion and a trip to the hospital. That's when Jerry Reinsdorf expressed his frustration and said, "He's a thug. He's a gangster. He shouldn't be in the league." He was far from the only NBA owner who felt that way. But not only was Laimbeer not kicked out of the league, but in the Wild West of the 1980s, he was very rarely suspended. For 10 straight seasons from 1983 to 1992, he played in at least 81 of the 82 games in the regular season. At one point, he played in 685 straight games. And by modern standards, there were plenty of incidents that were worthy of suspension during that stretch, including most of the hits that you've witnessed in this video. The frustration was building for the Pistons competitors. Many players had grown weary of being consistently victimized by this arrogant bully. And if the league wasn't going to step in and do something about it, then it seemed like it would only be a matter of time before a player did. This brings us to the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals between the Boston Celtics and the Detroit Pistons. Boston won the first 2 games in their building, so when Game 3 happened in Detroit, the Pistons were desperate to turn things around. Take a listen to how things unfolded.
And while their offense was clicking in Game 3, there was something else that did the most damage.
And now they have to separate Mahorn and McHale and Laimbeer.
Bill said, look, we got to go out there and set the tone.
Listen to this slap.
We may lose the game, but we ain't going to lose the fight.
I'd like to have a mental edge with their best player. That was Bird. And if you could break him, you could break their whole unit.
No, it goes to Bird in the corner. And we're starting to see the bang-bang stuff now. Rodman is all over Bird. C-State goes baseline, goes underneath. Dishes off now to Bird. And there is a violent knockdown by Laimbeer. Oh, my. A completely unnecessary foul by Laimbeer, and he pulled Bird to the ground. He slammed him to the ground. The yellow, gutless way they do things here. Now Isiah Thomas is coming over.
I could see I was already up in the air, and I was coming down, and I was going to hammer him.
And Laimbeer just takes him down.
And down we went. Oh, well, it happens.
Bird is gone. Laimbeer is gone.
In Game 4, the Bad Boys would maintain their level of physicality and took advantage of the shaken Celtics team. They tied up the series with an absolute beatdown, 145 to 119. Now the series was going back to Boston for Game 5. And this is when one of the Celtics players decided that enough was enough. Robert Parrish, the 7'1" center who has a history in martial arts, decided to take some swings at Laimbeer and struck him in the face, not once, but twice. Now here's the craziest part about all of this. Although the whistle was blown and the action stopped, after careful consideration, Parrish was not penalized in any way for these strikes. No ejection, no suspension, no technical foul, or even a common foul. The refs basically told Laimbeer to shake it off and resume the action. With such a lack of consequences for an obvious cheap shot, it kinda makes you wonder if the refs were indicating their own feelings about Laimbeer and his antics. Now the Celtics would go on to win the game in iconic fashion, thanks to the heroics of Larry Bird. They would also go on to win the series in the deciding 7th game, earning a trip to the NBA Finals for the 4th straight year. As for Bill Laimbeer, he wouldn't change his ways after the shot to the face. But at the very least, the players, and to a certain extent the referees, showed him that he could no longer get away with whatever he wanted without dealing with some kind of natural consequences of his own. It might have looked brutal, but ask any non-Detroit Pistons fans who was alive to see it, and they'll tell you that this was one of the most cathartic things they had ever seen on the basketball court. After being a fan of NBA basketball for several decades at this point, I've noticed the tendencies of the league office and of the media, To put it simply, the media doesn't always play fairly. Some guys are just celebrated for basically everything they do. I'm talking about the poster children of the league. The guys that, for one reason or another, have been embraced by the media and are pushed as the role models of the league. Take for example a player like Michael Jordan. Now yes, I firmly believe that he is the greatest player in basketball history, but two things can be true at once. It was within the NBA's best interest to promote Michael Jordan and convince everyone that they want to be like Mike. He was sold, in a way, as the hero of the league. Obviously, Michael Jordan is celebrated for the championships he won, but some of his performances are celebrated and remembered fondly even though they came in defeat. Like Game 2 in the first round of the 1986 playoffs, where Jordan dropped an NBA postseason record 63 points against the Boston Celtics. Regardless of the final score, that was a legendary performance that deserves to be commemorated on a frequent basis. But what if I told you that there was a similar performance in the NBA's past, but it is almost never celebrated to the same extent, because it came from a quote villain of the league rather than a hero? I'm talking about one utterly incredible performance from the highly controversial NBA champion, Isiah Thomas. Whether it was back in the 1980s when he was in his prime, or even today when we're looking at his career in hindsight, the NBA media has always been reluctant to embrace this star and promote his all-time great performances. And honestly, that's not surprising if you know his history. Isiah Thomas was the famous leader of the bad boy Detroit Pistons, a team that was notorious for their rebellious attitude and for their physically punishing defense. It was very common during that era for the Pistons to commit an excessive foul that would result in an all-out brawl between both teams. And the most annoying part was that they reveled in it. They took pride in the fact that they were the hated villains of the NBA. So to put it bluntly, there wasn't much love for the Pistons from the other teams around the league or from the general basketball audience. The long-term consequences of this have been extensive. Isiah Thomas was kept off of the 1992 Dream Team because of how the players felt about him. And Isiah is also very rarely brought up today in the conversation of the greatest point guards of all time, even though he certainly deserves to be in it. Again, I believe another one of those long-term consequences is the fact that the media and the league basically never talk about what is arguably the most heroic playoff performance of all time. It happened in the 1988 NBA Finals between the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers and these Detroit Pistons. The Pistons were up 3-2 in the series, with Game 6 being played in Los Angeles. Detroit had a golden opportunity to win their first championship of the decade, but in order for that to happen, their star player was going to have to excel on the court. The Lakers were leading 56-48 in the third quarter, when Isiah Thomas decided to take over completely. Isiah was making basically everything, like runners, contested jumpers, and driving layups. He scored 14 straight points for the Pistons, and the momentum was beginning to swing in their favor. But that's when tragedy struck. With a little under 5 minutes left in the third, Isiah rolled his ankle and was in agonizing pain. Based on his time spent on the ground, no one expected Thomas to be able to continue. And before you think this was an over-dramatized situation, there is visual evidence that Isiah's ankle wasn't just hurt, but it had swelled like a balloon.
Came back and played on 1 foot.
You know, during that period of time, I was laying there thinking like,
this is it. You were thinking that you had to do it this game right there, right?
Yeah, and because we came to win Game 6, right?
Yeah.
And all the heartache that we had went through, the mistakes that I had made, and then I started thinking about like, you know, my mom and stuff, and just like I got to find a way to play, just to do something, just to get back into the game.
Somehow, Isiah pushed through the pain and was returning to the court. Walking on that ankle alone must have been very difficult, but to play basketball on it and stand out among the rest is a feat that's hard to even fathom. There was 3 minutes and 44 seconds left in the third when Isiah rejoined the action, and somehow he maintained his fire as he continued to hit ridiculous shot after ridiculous shot. Despite playing on 1 foot, Isiah scored 11 of the Pistons' final 15 points of the quarter. In other words, Thomas scored an NBA Finals record 25 points in the third quarter alone. This is a record that still stands to this very day. Healthy or not, no other player has ever scored that many points in a single quarter of an NBA Finals game. And again, Isiah did this on an ankle that was roughly twice its normal size. The fourth quarter was an intense back and forth affair. Down by 1 point with just over 1 minute remaining, Isiah Thomas yet again hit an incredible baseline jumper to give him 43 points on the evening and a 100-99 lead over the Lakers. The Pistons continued to hold a 1-point lead with less than 20 seconds left in the ballgame, but unfortunately for Detroit, Bill Laimbeer apparently fouled Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on this skyhook, in what is now known as one of the most controversial whistles in the history of the league. This play is now famously called the Phantom Foul. Kareem would go on to make both free throws and the Lakers would win Game 6. Los Angeles would go on to win Game 7 in controversial fashion as well, making the final 2 games of this series some of the greatest what-if moments in Pistons history. So to recap, at the end of Game 6, Isiah Thomas had 43 points, 8 assists, and 6 steals on 56%. And of course, the single quarter record to go along with that. In my opinion, if Michael Jordan should be celebrated for his 63 against the Boston Celtics in a loss, and if LeBron James should be celebrated for his 50-point game in a loss in the 2018 Finals, then there's no question that we should significantly honor this record-breaking performance from Isiah Thomas as well, especially when you consider what he had to push through in order to do it.
He would be unbelievable in today's game because he could switch 1 to 5. And so he could, guy come off the pick and you got the 1, oh, he's moving his feet. And if you throw the lob, he's going back to still try to contest the lob. I've never seen a player that could double in the pick and roll and get back to his man on the roll and still block the shot. He was the most unique athlete in terms of instinct. Yeah. Like, he just knew when to leave. He knew when to stay. He knew when to come. I know you're a great defensive player, and that's why I kind of watch certain things that you do on the pick and roll. And it's very, okay, imagine if you were 6'10", and your athleticism was Blake Griffin. That was Hakeem. Now, how many people were scoring you? How many? That's him.
Jesus. And, you know, all the other teams I played for, the one common denominator was great big men. Think about Shaq, Tim Duncan. Mm-hmm. And if you say right now, name the top 5 big men, I played with 3 of them.
Who's who? You played with 3 of them?
Well, Dream's number 1 by far.
He was drafted before Michael Jordan. And no one blinks. No one uttered an insulting syllable towards the Houston Rockets for grabbing Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. No one has ever said a word.
Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon has been in the news a lot lately, mainly for the fact that he helped create the monster that is Victor Wembanyama, who is currently dominating the modern NBA with his massive leap forward this past offseason. But what's important to keep in mind is that long before Hakeem was creating monsters, he was the monster. If you're unfamiliar with Olajuwon's game, then you need to know that he was one of the most complete centers in the history of the league. For goodness sake, the man was drafted before Michael Jordan, and absolutely nobody in Houston regrets it. He likely had the greatest footwork of any player to ever play this game. He's in the argument for the greatest defender of all time. He's one of only 3 players to win MVP and DPOY in the same season. He's the all-time leader in blocked shots. He has the highest career steals per game average of any center in league history. He was an elite rebounder, a marvelous mid-range shooter, and he's ranked 16th on the NBA's all-time scoring list. He's a 2-time champion, a 2-time Finals MVP, and is the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back championships without having a single supporting All-Star on either of those teams. The list of impressive all-around accolades goes on, but one of the accomplishments that perfectly sums up his game is the fact that Hakeem is one of only 4 players in NBA history to achieve the illustrious quadruple-double. It happened on March 29, 1990, in a blowout victory over the Milwaukee Bucks. On the night, Hakeem had 18 points, 16 rebounds, 10 assists, and 11 blocks. Now that's already insane, but what's truly crazy is how Olajuwon nearly had a second quadruple-double just 3 weeks earlier. On March 3, 1990, in a blowout victory over the Warriors, Hakeem had 29 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists, 5 steals, and 11 blocks on 52% shooting from the field. This wasn't just a couple of random nights where Hakeem had otherworldly performances, but rather they were a couple of highlights from one of the most locked-in months that a superstar player has ever experienced. Between those two quadruple-double type performances, which was only a 3-week spread, Hakeem had 5 games where he had at least 8 blocked shots, 2 games with at least 20 rebounds, and 5 games with at least 4 steals. Between February 15th and March 29th of the 1990 season, Hakeem had a stretch that even his prodigy, Victor Wembanyama, would have a hard time achieving. Over that 22-game stretch, he averaged an utterly insane 25.7 points, 15.6 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 2.7 steals, and 6 blocks on 47.5% shooting. Every bit of that production was desperately needed for his squad, because at the beginning of that stretch, the Rockets were only the 10th seed in the Western Conference. But by the end of that stretch, where he got his quadruple-double performance, they had moved up to the 8th seed, which is ultimately the spot where they finished their regular season, as he successfully dragged his Rockets into the playoffs. At the end of the day, this was one of the greatest carry jobs in league history. But at the same time, this isn't even the most famous carry job of his legendary career, as he would have that several years into the future, as he led his team to multiple championships as the lone All-Star. Now listen, I understand getting hyped at some of the incredible stat lines that we're seeing in this modern NBA. Trust me, I get hyped about them too. But sometimes, I think we're too quick to act like they're the sort of performances that we've never seen before, when in reality, the mentors of those stars did things just like that before these modern guys had even been born.
Why do you think no one else has been able to develop or mimic? Because this is a mimic and copycat league.
Right.
You know, we saw Kobe emulate Mike to a T.
To a T.
Why no one ever tried to emulate arguably the most unstoppable shot ever created?
You know what I heard, Matt, is that it wasn't a cool shot. It didn't look cool.
Okay.
I said it didn't look cool. Scored 38,000 points with that damn shot.
I know.
Why does it have to look cool?
Right.
And nobody could stop it. He either missed or made. It wasn't
nothing you could do about it.
Yeah, it wasn't like you could block it and all that. I mean, I think in all the years that I played with him, all the years that I watched him play before I got to the league, I saw one person block it, maybe two, and I think Ralph Sampson was one. So I only saw one guy block it, and that was from the weak side, but you couldn't do nothing with that shot. So for guys not to even try that shot, it's amazing to me, you know, because I had a guy at practice, we had a 7-foot African kid in Jersey that we trying to do it, you know, trying to bring him in and develop him.
So
you know what I'm talking about. I can't remember his name though.
Somali Samaki?
Yeah.
That was our guy. I remember. I remember.
And so he was like, I block any shot. I was like, I said, I'll tell you what, I'm 6'4", you can't block my skyhook. And I shot this shot about 10 times in practice on it. He couldn't block it.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm 6'4".
Right, imagine being 7.
That's why I don't understand why it was a shot that wasn't duplicated, like you said, over the years. But from what I heard, guys were like, it's not a cool shot.
Very few players, if any, have really had a significant skyhook. And why don't they learn it?
The reason that young kids today don't learn how to shoot hook shots is because everybody is so enamored with the three-point shot. So the kids, they don't want 2 points. They don't want to work with their back to the basket. That's not cool. They want to go out there in the stratosphere and shoot three-pointers. But they're not teaching the young kids how to score in the paint with their back to the basket, and therefore they don't, a lot of them don't get to learn the hook shot, and they don't get to realize that if you get close to the basket, a lot more of your shots will go in.
For many, many years, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar stood atop the NBA's all-time scoring list, and he achieved that primarily with one beautiful basketball shot, the skyhook. The The skyhook is not just an ordinary basketball shot, or even an ordinary hook shot. Basic hook shots don't reach as high into the air. There's often a follow-through with the shooting arm as it moves towards the basket, meaning it's more easily contested by the opposing defender. But the skyhook is different. It requires large mitts that can grip the ball comfortably with only one hand. And then it's about raising the basketball straight up into the sky, and instead of moving the arm closer to the basket like a basic hook shot, it's just a simple flick of the wrist. There's less movement and more precision, which naturally requires even more practice to perfect it. As Byron Scott said in the intro of this video, even as a 6'4" player, it's lethal. But as a 7'2" player with an even longer wingspan, it makes you basically unstoppable. From an accolade standpoint, you can make an argument that Kareem is the most accomplished player ever. He was a 19-time All-Star, he won 6 NBA championships, and an NBA record 6 league MVPs. And again, this was due primarily to his bread and butter, the skyhook. There were certain attributes of the captain that added to the shot's effectiveness. For one, Kareem was a magnificent athlete who had a remarkably high vertical leap, especially in comparison to the general NBA big man. Even all-time great shot blockers who were as tall as 7 foot 7 inches tall, like Manu Bol for example, were completely helpless to stop it. This in a way made Kareem the ultimate go-to option in 1 or 2 point deficits with little time left on the clock, because he could essentially get off a good look at will. And for both the Milwaukee Bucks and the Los Angeles Lakers, it was often the difference between a win and a loss. None of this came easily and quickly though. According to Kareem, he worked on this shot daily ever since the 5th grade, and that's when he first started implementing the George Mikan drill into his practices, which is basically constant switching between right and left-handed hooks around the basket. But obviously, the hard work and repetition paid off, as it not only enabled Kareem to become one of the greatest players of all time, but it also gave him incredible longevity as a scorer. Even as his leaping ability and speed plummeted, Kareem was still able to score effectively for his Lakers until he was 42 years old. Again, that's the power of this unstoppable shot, which many people, including yours truly, believe is the most unstoppable shot of all time. So if this is all the case, and a top 3 player in league history was able to build his Hall of Fame career off of it, then why don't we see more players today trying to replicate this shot? Well, I think there's a variety of contributing factors, but the fact that it isn't considered quote cool is certainly one of them. Once in an interview, while he was an active player, Shaquille O'Neal called the skyhook one of the most effective shots in the history of the game. He went on to say, "My father made me shoot it all the time, but being a hip-hop kid, I didn't want to do it. We're different. We like to be a lot cooler." Later on, Kareem would say, "It's not a macho shot." He recognized how it was starting to go out of style all the way back in the 1960s, but he proceeded to implement it into his game anyway. Now, even if some modern players don't have a problem with its quote lack of coolness, the reality is that it's still a very difficult shot to master. Kareem had the benefit of utilizing it for most of his life, and from a posture and mechanics standpoint, it's simply unlike any other type of shot within the league. Now, some have said that it doesn't carry much value in the modern NBA, all because of the inflation in three-point shots. But that simply isn't true, even when looking at some of the most crucial analytics. For his career, Kareem shot an absurdly efficient 55.9% from the field. For some perspective, consider the fact that the league average three-point efficiency is 36%. This means that the average Kareem Abdul-Jabbar shot is literally more valuable than the average three-point shot is in this modern NBA. That's just when looking at Kareem's career though. In his prime in 1972, he was hitting 57.4% of his shots on an insane volume of attempts that translated to 34.8 points per game. If you're scoring that many points on that level of efficiency, then the advanced stats would suggest that a player like that should be shooting the ball basically every single time he touches it. Now, we've seen glimpses of it throughout the years. Yao Ming is one player specifically who had a similar form and soft touch on his skyhook, but these examples grow fewer and farther between. Unfortunately, it's so out of the minds of the current day players that it seems as if it may never make a significant comeback. But at the very least, there's some small reasons for hope. The NBA's most promising young star currently is Victor Wembanyama, and he's expressed interest in learning the shot and implementing it into his game at some point in his career. This is a player who has more quickness and agility than any other player who's played the game at his size. And consider the fact that he's several inches taller than Kareem, with a wingspan that's rumored to be close to 8 feet long. If he, of all people, can master this lost art, then the word unstoppable might not be strong enough to emphasize the dominance he would have over the league. I've been watching the game of basketball for many years at this point, and throughout that time, I've had a core belief that I've never really articulated to anyone. Basically, it's this. There's championship caliber players who never won a championship, and then there's NBA champions who were simply along for the ride. Unfortunately, legacies are defined mostly by the bottom line. Did you win or did you not? It's why Shaquille O'Neal can continue to roast Charles Barkley time and time again on live television, regardless of the fact that the round mound of rebound almost always took his game to another level in the NBA playoffs. If you ask me, when it comes to championship caliber players who never won a championship, one player in NBA history fits that description better than anyone else I've ever seen. You know him as the human highlight film Dominique Wilkins. What if I told you that Neek wasn't just a great dunker, and he wasn't just a great scorer, but he was without question one of the most complete offensive weapons in the history of the game. And when the postseason came around, somehow he always became even better, and was able to contend with dynastic juggernauts that you would assume his roster would have no business competing with. As Dominique himself has said on many different occasions, you don't score nearly 30,000 points in your career simply as a dunker. On the contrary, Neek was not only an above-the-rim athlete, but he was a mid-range artist, equipped with a soft shooting touch and with pristine footwork. He was a remarkable rebounder for a 6'8" wing, getting as high as 9 rebounds per game in 1991. These incredible attributes enabled Wilkins to complete many impressive feats, like leading the entire NBA in scoring during the 1985 to 1986 season, where he averaged 30.3 points per game, even ahead of elite scorers like Larry Bird, Alex English, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That season, he led his Hawks to 50 wins in a stacked Eastern Conference, and thanks to this stellar season-long performance, he finished second in the MVP voting, ahead of Magic Johnson and only behind Larry Bird. Dominique was also an athlete who developed his game over time, and as his career progressed, he didn't just become a solid three-point shooter, but he became legitimately one of the best three-point shooters in the entire league. By 1993, Wilkins was hitting a deadly 38% of his three-point shots, while ranking 7th in the league in three-pointers attempted per game. For goodness sake, he was 6th in the league in three-pointers made per game. During that season, on March 9th, 1993, Wilkins had his greatest performance from distance, as he scored 37 points while making 8 of his 12 three-point attempts. At the time, that was the Hawks franchise record for the most three-pointers made in a single game. And to this day, only 3 Hawks players have ever made more three-pointers in a game, regardless of the massive inflation in three-pointers attempted. Obviously, all of these aspects of his game are incredible, but the thing that always stood out to me the most is how Wilkins never shrunk under the weight of the moment. When the lights were the brightest, Neek performed at his best, as he always rose to the occasion. A perfect example of this comes from his epic battles with Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. Anytime these elite superstars squared off, you knew you were in for something special. Many of their matchups were simply some of the greatest one-on-one duels of all time, like on December 10th, 1986, when Wilkins outperformed Michael Jordan's 41 points by dropping 57 points of his own on 68% shooting, as he led his Hawks to a massive victory. Those 57 points are still the most points ever scored against Michael Jordan in a single game. Or how about when MJ scored 61 points on Dominique? But it was Neek who had 34 points and who hit the game-winning jumper right in MJ's face. For the record, Dominique dropped at least 35 points on Michael Jordan a total of 15 times throughout his career. Meanwhile, Jordan dropped at least 35 on Dominique a fewer 13 times. Throughout their careers, both guys averaged roughly 30 points per game against one another. To put it simply, on any given night, you never knew who was going to get the last laugh between Dominique and MJ. When it came to the individual matchup, the battles between Larry Bird and Dominique Wilkins were more of the same. In the totality of their careers against one another, Dominique averaged more points per game than Larry Bird, although it was usually Bird who got the victories, as his team was 40-17 against the human highlight film. With that being said, there was no question who had the better supporting cast, as Bird was supported by one of the best centers in the league in Robert Parrish, one of the best power forwards of all time in Kevin McHale, one of the best perimeter defenders in the league in Dennis Johnson, and a Sixth Man of the Year winner in Bill Walton. I mean no disrespect to the Atlanta Hawks who played alongside of Neek, as he did have some quality role players behind him in Doc Rivers, and in one of the original symbols of longevity, Kevin Willis. With that being said, the overall supporting cast was simply nowhere close to the level of support that Magic Johnson had, that Isiah Thomas had, and that Larry Bird had, which is mainly why those legends were able to accumulate multiple championships in the 1980s, while Dominique remained ringless. Even with all of this being the case, Wilkins' ability to excel in the postseason had some people believing that he could actually do the unthinkable and defeat the defending Eastern Conference champion Boston Celtics and make it to the NBA Finals. It was the 1988 Eastern Conference semifinals between the 57-win Boston Celtics and the 50-win Atlanta Hawks. 5 NBA Hall of Famers versus 1. What proceeded to happen was one of the most epic battles in playoff history, with an iconic finish for the ages. In a must-win fourth game, Dominique dropped an efficient 40 points to give his Hawks the victory. But his best performance of the series would come in its most crucial contest, the deciding 7th game. This contest is now fondly remembered in basketball lore as simply the duel. Larry Legend and the human highlight film were trading basket after basket throughout. It was an intense back-and-forth game, capped off with one of the most thrilling fourth quarters in playoff history. As expected, Dominique was his best when he had to be, and heading into Atlanta's final possession, he had torched the Celtics defense for 46 points. The Hawks were down and needed a 3-point basket to force overtime. After seeing Wilkins light them up all night long, the Celtics would not be taking any risks, and decided to foul Dominique intentionally before he could attempt a 3-point shot. He proceeded to make the first free throw, and then missed the second one on purpose. But Atlanta was unable to secure the rebound, and the Celtics won the series as a result. On the night, Dominique scored 47 points on 19 of 33 shooting, in what was the most important basketball game of his professional career. Again, a team with just one Hall of Famer nearly took down a dynastic team that had 5. All because Dominique was the kind of superstar player who rose to the occasion. As I mentioned earlier in this video, there are NBA champions who were simply along for the ride. And then there's championship caliber players who never won a championship. The latter was Dominique. In an era of organic super teams like the Lakers, Celtics, Pistons, and 76ers, Dominique unfortunately never got to experience that level of a supporting cast, which I believe is the sole reason his career ended without multiple championship rings. But at the end of the day, if you ask me how I personally remember the legacy of Dominique Wilkins, It's that on any given night, regardless of who was out there on the court, Dominique could be the best player out there. It didn't matter if it was Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Julius Erving, or Michael Jordan. On any given night, Dominique could be the best of the very best.
He's always able to rebound, always had the ability to seek out the ball and go get it. But when you play against guys like Moses Malone and some of the top rebounders in the league, the one thing that they always have a second jump. I never had the second jump, but they could keep the ball alive and tip it to themselves or take it off the bank board or off the rim and get that second jump to get it. And I was always amazed how he's able to not only use his body, but his strength and his legs to get in a position to rebound.
And seeing his masculinity, muscular, just like throwing himself around, like in the paint. Nobody was playing that physical. He would miss on purpose. Mm-hmm. Like, think about that. Like, nobody did stuff like that. This is what I mean about the genius of basketball players, right? He would miss on purpose and then get a better position and then go up and dunk it, right? So you have him guarded in the post. He'll throw up an old crazy shot, then go get it, and then kind of smile at you and dunk. So we playing against him, and so is Laimbeer, Kent Benson, Kelly Tripucka. And we playing the 76ers, and Moses Malone is just, he's having his way back there. So we come to the bench, and I'm like, Lamb, you got to block him out. Laimbeer looked at me and he goes, "This is the strongest guy I've ever seen in my life."
Moses Eugene Malone, also known as the chairman of the boards, and for good reason. Moses was a dominant force offensively and an all-time great rebounder. Moses was so much better than many NBA fans realize, and there's a number of reasons for this that go beyond simply his production. If I had to pick the biggest reason, I would say it's his legacy's identity crisis. Throughout his career, Moses played for 9 different teams, which is extremely rare even for a role player. But for an all-time great player, it's almost completely unheard of. Just look at the amount of different jerseys and numbers that this guy wore. The thing is, when a player isn't associated with a specific franchise, it affects his legacy and means that he isn't often remembered as fondly because he can't be claimed by one fan base as their own. The 6'10 Moses was drafted in the 3rd round of the 1974 ABA draft by the Utah Stars. He was selected relatively late and straight out of high school, which wasn't a very common occurrence. In fact, at the time, the New York Times even called him the first high schooler to go straight to the pros in modern basketball history. He immediately proved he was more than ready. As only a 19-year-old in his rookie season in the ABA, Moses averaged 18.8 points, 14.6 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks on 57% shooting. This was good enough to make him an ABA All-Star in only his first year. The Stars eventually lost in the semifinals to the Denver Nuggets in 6 games. Unfortunately, Moses would not be enough to save the Stars franchise from their massive debt. The Stars organization folded, and as a result, they sold Malone to the Spirits of St. Louis. But he wouldn't get very comfortable there either. After only playing half of his second season in the league, the ABA and NBA merged before the beginning of his 3rd season as a pro. The Spirits were not among the teams selected to join the NBA, meaning Malone would once again be available in a draft. This time, it was the NBA-ABA merger draft, where he was selected by the New Orleans Jazz, before he was swapped to the Portland Trail Blazers for a regular draft pick. Before the Blazers then experienced salary concerns and then traded him to the Buffalo Braves. I'm honestly starting to feel sorry for Moses just writing this script. Malone's 3rd season finally began with the Braves, but they were only playing him about 3 minutes a game, which had the young Malone extremely frustrated. As a result, after only 2 games with the Braves, they traded him to the Houston Rockets for 2 future first-round picks. Moses was barely into his 3rd season as a pro, and he had already been claimed by 6 different teams. The good news is that Malone would finally find a somewhat long-term home with the Rockets, and the frustrated and determined 21-year-old was ready to make all of the doubters look stupid, and he would do just that. He played 80 games for the Rockets at about 31 minutes a game, and he averaged 13.5 points, 13.4 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks on 48% shooting. They eventually lost in the conference finals, but this was just a taste of what the Rockets and Moses were capable of. The following season, he averaged 19.4 points, 15 rebounds and 1.3 blocks on 50% shooting. The only problem was that this year was cut short to just 59 games played when he got a stress fracture in his right foot, and his year was done. But when he would return healthy the following season, the prime of his monstrous career would begin. 1979 to 1982 was his best 4 years with Houston, and in that stretch he averaged 27.4 points, 15.4 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks on 52% shooting. He also won the league MVP award in 2 of those seasons. This includes a performance against the New Orleans Jazz where he pulled down 37 rebounds in a single game. In the 1981-82 season, he put up 31.1 points and 14.7 rebounds in what was arguably the best year of his career. Let me put those numbers in perspective. No one in all of the years since has matched those 2 averages in a single season. Not Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, not Shaquille O'Neal, not Hakeem or Giannis. No one. Statistically, he stood out far beyond his peers. From 1979 to 1985, he won 6 rebounding titles in 7 years, including 5 straight. His 6 rebounding titles is the 3rd most in NBA history, behind only Dennis Rodman and Wilt Chamberlain, and his streak of 5 years is the 2nd longest streak ever, behind only Rodman. The insane rebounding numbers he put up were not a product of his era either. In the modern NBA, teams are averaging around 45 rebounds a game. In Wilt Chamberlain's era, teams were averaging anywhere from 53 to 73 rebounds a game. And in Moses Malone's era, teams were averaging around 43 rebounds a game. Malone's era put him at a rebounding disadvantage, yet despite playing in the era with the fewest available rebounds in NBA history, Moses still put up video game numbers. With all of this being said, when it came to elite teams, the Rockets were playing in one of the most top-heavy eras in basketball history. The closest they came to winning the championship with Moses leading the way was in the 1981 season, but they lost in the NBA Finals in 6 games to the Larry Bird-led Celtics. If Moses was going to win an NBA championship in that era, he was going to need an even more talented supporting cast. Enter the summer of 1982 free agency. After much negotiating, Moses Malone was heading east to the talented and powerful Philadelphia 76ers. Waiting for him there was the still lethal man known as Dr. J, Julius Erving. With players like Moses, the Doctor, Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, and Bobby Jones, the 76ers were ready to take the NBA by storm, and that's exactly what they did. They steamrolled the league, finishing with a 65-17 record, and although many contributed, Moses was clearly the best player throughout, putting up averages of 24.5 points, 15.3 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 50.1% shooting. His year-long performance earned him his 3rd MVP award and his 2nd straight. Moses is still the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back MVP awards on 2 separate teams. Their dominance continued into the playoffs as they went on an 11-1 run throughout the postseason, including a 4-game sweep of Kareem and Magic's Lakers in the NBA Finals. In those finals, Moses absolutely destroyed Kareem and the Lakers, putting up 25.8 points, 18 rebounds, 1.5 steals, and 1.5 blocks on 50.7% shooting, and he was rewarded the Finals MVP. When we think of the era of 1980s basketball, we understandably think of Magic's Lakers and Bird's Celtics. But it's also important for us to remember that sandwiched in those years is one of the greatest teams of all time, the 1983 Philadelphia 76ers. Malone played for many years after this and was certainly productive, but this was without question the highlight of his career. He finished out his long-lasting career also playing for Washington, Atlanta, Milwaukee, and a return to Philly and San Antonio. In his career, he had 11 straight seasons where he averaged at least 20 points and 10 rebounds. He was a 13-time All-Star, made 8 All-NBA teams and 2 All-Defense teams, and he's 5th on the all-time rebounds list. His game was made up of incredible stamina, and he played with hustle, heart, and strength. Many people compare the greatest centers of all time, and usually the names that people bring up are guys like Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Shaquille O'Neal, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Hakeem Olajuwon. I am telling you with complete conviction that Moses Malone belongs in that group.
And I think the NBA has gotten way past the balance and watching guys give up dunks to shoot threes on fast breaks. That kind of thing. I think that has hurt the game a lot. Now, that's me. I am old school, as we all know. JJ, perfect. But, Bird shot plenty of threes. And they had Parrish and McHale. Bird shot plenty of threes. The best. And Bird is one of the great shooters in the history of the sport. Not even close.
Bird shot threes. He never was a volume shooter from three.
No, I know that, but he was a great three-point shooter. He was not good. He was great. He's one of the top 5 three-point shooters of all time. That's how good Bird is. Oh, yes.
We're
won three-point shooting contests. He was phenomenal. Bird's a great shooter.
Wait a minute, Doggy.
And Bird didn't shoot.
Bird is absolutely one of the greatest shooters ever, but he's not one of the top 5 3-point, top 3, whatever you just said.
Did you see the three-point shooting that he put on, those clinics that he put on at the All-Star game?
Again,
did you watch?
Doggy, it's just math. It's attempts, it's makes, and it's percentage. And there's no way you could ever argue Larry Bird is a top 3 3-point shooter of all time. You can't make that argument.
You're basing it on math. You're basing it on math in a time of when he played. I'm basing it on just shooting. Bird is a unbelievable.
Again, we had this discussion the other day. About James Naismith. James Naismith invented the game. You were rewarded for putting the ball in the basket. There's plenty of people that have shot more, made more, and guess what? Made more at a higher percentage than Larry Bird from 3. I'm not saying Larry Bird is not one of the greatest shooters ever. He's not one of the greatest 3-point shooters ever.
Generally speaking, Larry Joe Bird is considered as not only one of the greatest players of all time, but as one of the greatest three-point shooters in the history of the league. Although, a growing number of people have been clapping back at that claim, and once upon a time, leading that charge was JJ Redick. Now, long before he was getting angry as the Lakers head coach, this narrative was getting him angry on ESPN, as you guys all saw in the intro. Before I get too deep into this, I have to say, I don't completely disagree with Redick. Saying Larry Bird is a top 5 3-point shooter of all time is probably a little too much. I mean, just off the top of my head, you have guys like Steph Curry, Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, Klay Thompson, and Damian Lillard. That's a pretty rock solid top 5. Then even competing for the next spots are guys like Steve Nash, Dirk Nowitzki, Kevin Durant, and even James Harden, who was second all-time in three-pointers made. The point is, the competition is incredibly stiff. So I don't necessarily have a problem with someone having Bird out of their top 5. But what I do have a problem with is someone saying that Bird is objectively not one of the greatest three-point shooters of all time, which again, Redick claimed adamantly.
I'm not saying Larry Bird is not one of the greatest shooters ever. He's not one of the greatest three-point shooters ever.
To me, this growing narrative is by far the dumbest criticism of Larry Bird, because it's not only an ignorant thing to say about this legend, but it's also overly simplistic logic to apply against another era of basketball as a whole. Redick's argument is that Bird didn't shoot enough three-point shots. The argument is mostly against his volume. The problem with that logic is that it's an unfair standard to apply to the NBA's past. Because prior to the 2010s, everyone shot a fraction of the three-point shots that they're shooting today, which basically means that the only players that are allowed to be in the greatest three-point shooters conversations are all guys that have played within the last 15 years. Here's where it gets really stupid though. In 2025, teams shot an average of 37.6 three-point attempts per game, and 40 years before that, teams were averaging 3.1 per game. In Steph Curry's historic 2016 season, he attempted 886 three-point attempts throughout the regular season. That was more than the top 2 teams in 1986 combined. Bird's Celtics as a whole only attempted 396 threes in 1986. To put it simply, if Steph Curry played in Bird's era, he wouldn't be allowed to shoot that many threes. No one was, because coaches at the time didn't think it was smart and efficient basketball. So Curry would have shot less threes in the 80s, but Bird would have shot significantly more in this era. Yet by Redick's logic, that would disqualify Steph from being in the conversation, regardless of how efficient he would have been, and regardless of how he would have stood out from the competition in that era. With that nonsensical logic, modern players like Tyler Herro and Jordan Poole are considered better three-point shooters than a prime Reggie Miller and a prime Ray Allen. Make it make sense. Now, at one point, Redick was in an interview and he was getting mad at the hypotheticals.
Well, wasn't there? And the argument against that is, oh, well, if he had played in today's era, he would be a top 5. What? That doesn't even make sense. That's not based in reality or fact.
Wait a minute, but let's talk reality and fact. Bird is one of only 3 players to have multiple 50-40-90 seasons. The other 2 are a couple of the greatest three-point shooters of all time in Steve Nash and Kevin Durant. Reddit claimed that Bird was never a volume three-point shooter, which is objectively incorrect. During Bird's first 50-40-90 season, he led the entire league in three-pointers made and in three-pointers attempted. That same season, Bird was attempting more three-point attempts per game than the entire Detroit Pistons roster, which is who his Celtics played against in the Eastern Conference Finals. The year prior, in their historic 1986 season, Bird averaged more three-point attempts per game than nearly 1/3 of the teams within the league. Between 1985 and 1992, with a minimum of 400 games played, Bird had the 4th best three-point percentage in the entire league, and he was 2nd overall in attempts during that span, only bested by the very underrated Dale Ellis, who I would argue is also one of the all-time great three-point shooters. Larry Bird is tied for the most three-point contests won in NBA history with a total of 3. In Bird's final round of the 1986 three-point shootout, he scored 22 out of a possible 30 points. That is 73.3% of a possible perfect score, which is the 9th highest in NBA history. All-time great shooters like Ray Allen, Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, and Dirk Nowitzki have never achieved a final round score that efficient. JJ Redick has also never achieved a score that high, regardless of the round, which is necessary for me to state, seeing how he never made it past the first round in a three-point contest, despite the fact that he tried multiple times. Plain and simple, Bird was one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history. I personally don't care if you have him outside of your top 5, top 10, or top 20, because all of that can be debated. But to act like he doesn't belong in the conversation at all, simply because of the era he played in, while completely ignoring the context of the time, is simply one of the dumbest criticisms that you can possibly make.
You know, listen, people don't know this. Pat Riley came to me and he says, he called me and he said, I want to sit down and talk to you. I said, okay. So I met him early before the season and he sent all of us these letters that we had to be in top shape. Body fat had to be a certain percentage. I mean, Byron, remember?
Heck yeah.
And so after he got done discussing all that, he says, Buck, I need you to score more. I said, did you ask Kareem? That's the first thing I said. Did you talk to Kareem? He said, yeah, I talked to Cap. He good with it. I said, okay, because if you want me to score more, I got to shoot more.
Right.
And so so then I ran out and I started working on my post game.
Okay.
Because see, before that, I didn't really post up a lot. So I worked on my post game because I said, okay, I know I'm going to have smaller guys on me, so let me work on that. And then I went to Cap. I said, listen, man, teach me that hook. So he taught me how to shoot it. So I added that to my game. My scoring went up. So now teams didn't know what to do.
Yeah. When it comes to general basketball discussions, people love to delve into what-if scenarios about certain players. Like, what if LeBron James focused more on his scoring? How many points would he have averaged? What if Kobe Bryant focused his energy on facilitating? Even Kobe himself once dabbled in this thought process, claiming that he would have been the best point guard in the entire league if he focused on playmaking. One of these legends that you can make this argument for is Earvin Magic Johnson. Sure, Magic did score throughout his NBA career, but there's no question that he was first and foremost a pass-first player. John Stockton may be the NBA's all-time leader in total assists, but it's actually Magic who has the highest career assist per game average in NBA history, at a whopping 11.2. For some perspective, Magic's career average would be good enough as a single season average to lead the NBA in 21 out of the last 30 seasons of NBA history. Plain and simple, Magic was a giver, and that's his greatest claim to fame, as he was the unselfish leader of the Showtime Lakers offense that won 5 NBA championships during the 1980s. But once upon a time, it wasn't Magic's passing that was called upon to win a championship, but rather it was his scoring. It requires some of the context of the time in order to understand why his coach Pat Riley asked Magic to look to score for himself. Through the first half of the 1980s, the Lakers had been the league's most successful franchise, winning the championship in 1980, 1982, and in 1985. But 1986 was a different story. That year, in the Western Conference Finals, the Lakers were shockingly upset by the young and upcoming Houston Rockets, who were led by their twin tower tandem of Hakeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson. The series wasn't even close, as the Rockets won multiple games by double digits, before comfortably eliminating the Lakers in just 5 games. Over those 5 games, Magic averaged an insane 16.2 assists per game. Yet all it amounted to was an overwhelming defeat. The eventual champion was the legendary '86 Boston Celtics, who beat that same Rockets team in just 6 games. It was clear that what Magic and the Lakers were doing wasn't working. They had to get better, and they had to try something different. Which is why Pat Riley approached Magic Johnson in the 1986 offseason and told him that he needed to be a scorer. Surely, if 16.2 assists per game wasn't going to get it done in the NBA playoffs, then they would theoretically have a better chance if Magic was looking to score. After spending time in the gym working on his post-game and jump hooks, Magic was ready for the start of the 1986-87 season with a brand new mentality. Of course, Magic couldn't deny himself, as he was still the leading point guard and was going to be making plays for his teammates. But without question, he had improved significantly as a scorer and was beginning to dominate in that aspect. On 3 separate nights that season, Magic scored at least 40 points, including a monstrous 46-point performance where he nearly had a triple-double and shot the basketball 36 times. The adjustment was working, as the Showtime Lakers were winning more regular season games than ever before. By season's end, LA had a league-best 65-17 record, and Magic was named the league MVP, as he improved his scoring by 5 points over the previous season, on an average of 4 extra shot attempts per night. Magic averaged a career-high 23.9 points per game on 52.2% shooting. That season, he was ranked 10th overall in scoring, ahead of all-time great scorers like Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, and Hakeem Olajuwon. Somehow, Magic still managed to lead the NBA in assists per game, as he put up an average of 12.2 while simultaneously being 10th in scoring. This time, the Lakers would not be stopped in the West playoffs, as they went 11-1 through the first 3 rounds. Then, in the NBA Finals, they met up with Bird and the Celtics once again. What Boston had on their hands was a totally different beast, as Magic even outscored Larry Bird in the majority of those games. Moving forward to Game 4, it was a hostile Boston atmosphere, and with the game on the line, Magic experienced the reward of his offseason training, as he hit the game-winning baby skyhook right over the top of Boston's legendary big men. This version of Magic was utterly unstoppable, and over the course of the 6-game series, he averaged a marvelous 26.2 points, 13 assists, and 8 rebounds, while making a deadly 54% of his shots, as he led all Lakers players in points, assists, rebounds, and steals. Over the course of those finals, nobody on the Lakers or Celtics shot the ball more times than Magic Johnson, who reinvented himself to once again achieve basketball's greatest glory. At the conclusion of those finals, even Larry Bird, Magic's greatest rival, had to humbly admit what had now become clear to the basketball world.
Magic's just a great basketball player. He's the best I've ever seen, Unbelievable. I don't know what to say.
This was the rumor. They came to Michael. They really needed Michael to play. Mm-hmm. They came to Michael, and like David Stern and the Olympic team, they came to Michael and said, yo, Mike, we really need you to play. We need for you to just go global. And Mike said, all right, I will play only if Isiah is not on the team.
Damn. So he really said that?
He said that to them.
Damn.
And then Magic was like, I'm cool with that.
A lot of people believe that Isiah Thomas was one of the best 11 NBA players. A lot of people believe, Charles, he was better than John Stockton.
I think he was a better player than John Stockton.
Well, then why didn't he get to go on the team?
Well, you know, Shannon, number one, that is an amazing question because I'm so glad I get a chance to straighten this out.
Yes, please straighten it out.
Number one, they never asked me about Isiah Thomas.
Okay.
And I can't speak for the other guys, but they never asked me personally about Isiah Thomas. And Isiah Thomas probably should have been on the team. And they asked Michael Jordan, did he have anything to do with it? And then it actually just came out in the last year where he said, I'll play as long as Isiah don't play.
Thank you.
So,
and then you got to have him. If you're going overseas, you got to take the biggest guy.
So I don't know this personally, but I think it was Jack McCallum who said he had it on tape and he played it. Because I've been asked that question 1,000 times. Dude, they never asked me about Isiah Thomas. But apparently Michael didn't want him on the team.
Well, he wasn't going to be on the team.
Yeah.
Whoever Michael didn't want on the team wasn't going to be on the team.
We're not going to be on the team.
Now, there has been speculation that your icy relationship with Isiah Thomas is the reason that he was not selected. What is your reaction to that?
That was one of the stipulations put to me prior to me even committing, that Isiah wasn't a part of the team. I was getting strong innuendos that it wasn't just, it was coming from higher places that didn't want Isiah Thomas on the team.
That was so. It was wrong that Shaq and I wasn't on a dream team. It was just wrong.
Forward. Does Scottie Pippen have pictures of you or something? What's the deal with Scottie?
Wait a minute. Wait. Ho.
Something's going on.
I'm messing Did he want him on the team?
Well, I can't speak for Michael, but no, I did not want him on the team.
I don't mind Michael Jordan saying, I didn't want Isiah to be on the dream team. I don't mind, if Larry Bird said, I don't want Isiah to be on the dream team. But if Scottie Pippen say, I don't want Isiah to be on the dream team.
That's the problem.
Man, come on. You can't say nothing.
Okay, I got a new topic.
You can't say nothing. If Jordan is like, look, I'm not playing. If Isiah plays, okay, all right. Scottie Pippen, I'm not playing if Isiah plays. Man, go to the park.
Freedy, I need you to get up for a second. Get up for a second, if you would, Freedy.
Okay.
And Isiah, lay down on the couch. How long have you been harboring this, Isiah? Are you feeling better now that it's come out, Isiah?
Well, Ernie, it's been a while. It's been on my mind, for about, 25 years right now.
Does it feel like a weight is being lifted off of you?
Well, yeah, because I finally get to talk about it and just, the whole dream team experience. And again, I got no problems with, the greatest player to ever play say he don't want to play with me, or Magic saying he don't. But anybody below them talking about they don't want to play with me? Anybody?
Excuse me, Mr. Thomas.
And I say below them?
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Your hour is up. I'm sorry.
This video is kind of a personal topic for me because the first ever video I made that blew up on my channel was this one, called How and Why Michael Jordan Banned Isiah Thomas from the Dream Team. Although it exploded and got over 1 million views, the comments section was very divided, as some people agreed that it was Michael Jordan's doing, while others claimed that it was a more collective decision. What's crazy is that you guys can tell from the intro of this video that even the players are divided on who is specifically to blame. Whether it was Michael Jordan's fault, the team's fault, or the Olympic Committee's fault, Isiah Thomas was kept off the team in large part because of the controversial character that he was. Isiah was the leader of the Bad Boy Detroit Pistons, which was a group who was famous for their gritty and aggressive style of basketball that was often shamed and condemned by other teams within the league. Sure, the game of basketball was physically punishing in the 1990s, but if the league was at a 10 out of 10 on the physicality scale, then the Pistons specifically were at a 15. Then there was the famous incident where Isiah Thomas didn't shake hands with the Bulls after his team had been eliminated out of the playoffs. So to put it plainly, Isiah was not the most popular or liked guy within the league at that time. So naturally, someone kept him off the team. But today, we're looking at it from a different and more unique angle than what's usually discussed. Did Isiah Thomas actually deserve to be on the Dream Team? Based on the team's needs and based on his talent at that point in his career, did he deserve a spot on that squad? I think the answer is a bit more complicated than some of you realize. Now, people often make the assumption that Isiah would have been on the squad instead of the backup point guard for Team USA, John Stockton. And although they share the same position on the court, I do think that's an inaccurate assumption. At that point in time, there was no question that Stockton was the better player. Sure, Isiah arguably had the better peak, but by 1992, his game had taken a few steps back, as he was reaching the twilight of his career. Isiah was an all-star, but by his prior standards, he had relatively modest averages of 18.5 points, 7.2 assists, and 1.5 steals, while hitting 45% of his shots. His Pistons also had 48 wins, which was the worst record they had had in the previous 6 seasons. On the other hand, John Stockton averaged 16 points while being the league's leader in both assists and steals, with some truly monstrous numbers, and he was also way more efficient from the field, the three-point line, and from the free throw line. Unlike Isiah, Stockton played all 82 games, was an NBA All-Defender, and even received MVP consideration. So unless you're looking purely at their legacies, there's no way Isiah was more deserving of a spot than John Stockton. But there's other things to consider, and other ways Isiah could have got a spot. Let's start by looking at the team overall. At the point guard spot, you had Magic Johnson and John Stockton. At shooting guard, there was Michael Jordan and Clyde Drexler. At small forward, there was Larry Bird, Scottie Pippen, and Chris Mullin. At power forward, there was Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, and Christian Laettner. And at center, there was David Robinson and Patrick Ewing. So now let's do some process of elimination by going over the untouchables. First off, obviously, Michael Jordan. He's the GOAT, and he was the Olympic Committee's #1 priority to get on that roster. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were the legacy acquisitions. They're legends, and them playing together for one final ride was a big story of emphasis for these Olympics. So regardless of their health and physical condition, they're not being replaced. The team needed a starting anchor in the paint and a backup at the center position as well. So both David Robinson and Patrick Ewing are untouchables for this team. Similarly, Michael Jordan needed a backup at the shooting guard position, and Clyde Drexler was coming off of a season where he averaged 25 points per game, finished second in the MVP voting only behind MJ, and led his Blazers to the NBA Finals, where Jordan and the Bulls knocked him out. For all of those reasons, Drexler is also untouchable. The power forward position also needed a starter and a backup, and Charles Barkley and Karl Malone were two of the best players in the entire league at that time, so without question, both of them were untouchable. Then you have the third power forward in Christian Laettner, and believe it or not, his spot was also safe, because he was the only collegiate athlete on the roster, and the Olympic Committee did that as a way of honoring the old system, where only collegiate athletes were allowed to represent Team USA in the Olympics. So despite the fact that he was clearly the worst player on that team, he was definitely untouchable. This only leaves just 2 players, Scottie Pippen and Chris Mullin, who both happen to play at the small forward position. The small forward spot is also the only position other than power forward that ran 3 players deep, meaning it would be easy to trim down this position without having to hurt the team's depth. Yes, the power forward spot also ran 3 deep, but again, all of those guys were very untouchable. So it's only natural that we look at replacing one of the small forwards with another point guard in Isiah. So now we have to ask, Who was more deserving of keeping their spot, Scottie Pippen or Chris Mullin? Well, on the Chicago Bulls, Scottie Pippen was a number 2, while Chris Mullin was a number 1 for Golden State. If you look at their numbers side by side, the comparison is pretty tough, as Mullin was a premier scorer, while Pippen was a more well-rounded producer. Mullin did finish 6th overall in the MVP voting in 1992, while Pippen finished 9th. With all this being said, I think the committee would have gone for Scottie Pippen. He was coming off of his 2nd straight championship, and his on-court chemistry with their number 1 option, Michael Jordan, was undeniable. Plus, the Dream Team had plenty of lethal scoring options on the roster. So even though Mullin was a much better scorer, Pippen's gifts were probably more desirable for the team, since he was arguably the best wing defender in the league at that time, only rivaled by Michael Jordan. So after much contemplation, I think Scottie's spot is the one that's safe. Which means that if the committee had selected Isiah Thomas to be on the roster, he would have most likely replaced Chris Mullin. Which I know sounds awful in hindsight, because Mullin did end up being the team's 4th leading scorer and was by far their most crucial 3-point shooter, as he was 2nd on the team in attempts while hitting an absurd 54% of his 3-point shots. One can argue that Isiah's legacy and legend status warranted a spot on this roster, especially when you consider that Magic Johnson and Larry Bird made it onto the team even though one was limited by back problems, while the other wasn't even technically in the NBA anymore. So in that sense, you could say he deserved a spot ahead of Chris Mullin. But from a pure talent and production-based standpoint, there's no way Isiah was deserving of one of the 11 NBA spots. Chris Mullin was clearly the better and more productive player over the course of the 1991 to 1992 season. Beyond that, you could argue that Isiah Thomas wasn't even the best point guard to not make the team. That's because in Golden State, a young star by the name of Tim Hardaway was at his very peak, as he helped lead his Warriors to a 55-win season while averaging 23 points, 10 assists, 4 rebounds, and 2 steals, while being far more efficient than Isiah Thomas in every shooting metric, and while finishing 8th overall in the MVP voting. For goodness sake, even point guards like Mark Price and Kevin Johnson warranted some consideration as well, given how their numbers and team records were actually better than Isiah's. So yeah, from a legacy standpoint, you could make the argument that he deserved to be there. But from a talent and pure basketball perspective, there's just no way that Isiah Thomas in 1992 was one of the 11 most deserving players in the NBA. And with all of that being considered, it's debatable whether or not him being banned from the roster was even necessary in the first place. The NBA has changed a lot over the years, and with massive TV deals and with the game being as global as it is today, it's hard to envision a time where the league was in danger of dying completely. But that was the reality the NBA was in the 1970s. In an attempt to create more interest in the product, the two fiercely competitive leagues, the ABA and the NBA, merged together in 1976. And although it did raise the level of interest in the league temporarily, it was only a matter of time before it fizzled out completely. You see, the league's popularity was hindered by a multitude of issues in the late 70s. For one, racial tension was a major issue, as some players and styles were not fully embraced by the general audience. The contrasting styles of the ABA players and the NBA players were not conducive to a united basketball fandom at that time, as NBA fans preferred more of a fundamental and traditional approach, while ABA fans enjoyed the more flashy and modern aspects of the evolving game. Beyond that, harmful substances were basically everywhere throughout the league, which not only affected the game's image, but even the product on the court, as many players were not on their best behavior, and on-court fighting was nearly a nightly occurrence. Then begins the 1979 to 1980 season, where Magic Johnson and Larry Bird made their debut into the league. In future videos, I'll talk more about Bird's role in all of this, but this one is focused specifically on Magic and Showtime. What Earvin Magic Johnson brought to the game was just that, magic. Unlike the perception of the league throughout the late 70s, Magic was the definition of class, mixed with the shine of Hollywood showmanship. He was dazzling and incredibly skilled, but he always did it with a smile on his face. Magic's supreme confidence, charisma, and charm was exactly what the league desperately needed, and he didn't waste any time becoming the face of the league, as he famously won the NBA championship and the Finals MVP in just his rookie season. One of the most underrated aspects of Magic's character was his humble leadership. Unlike Shaq and Kobe of the 2000s, Magic was quick to tell his co-star Kareem Abdul-Jabbar that it was his team, and Magic would publicly make that claim in interviews as well. Kareem was known as the captain and Magic was known as Magic, and both players were content and thrived in those roles. Magic's leadership was contagious, and as an old mentor once told me, groups take on the image of their leader, and this was certainly the case for Magic and the Lakers, as they fed off of his enthusiasm, energy, and competitive drive. Not only did Magic want to constantly push the tempo, but his teammates embraced that style and excelled in it, as players like James Worthy and Byron Scott learned to acclimate their games to perfectly suit Magic's style. Thus, Showtime was born, an amazing and dazzling product that had the flair and fast-paced action of a Hollywood thriller. It was a unique time in the league, as one specific player wasn't the hottest ticket in sports, but rather it was the entire offense that emphasized teamwork, speed, and efficiency. Thanks to their brilliance and thanks to their legendary rivalry with a very different Boston Celtics, the league's ratings skyrocketed to an extent that pro basketball had never seen before. Not only was the Showtime era the most important time in Lakers franchise history, but they've also become a symbol and the standard of what basketball should be and is meant to be. Anytime a team executes teamwork in transition with precision and excellence, everybody is quick to call it Showtime. Teams, coaches, and players have been striving to emulate that same level of excellence, dominance, and entertainment for decades at this point. And I think it's fair to say that none of them have ever pulled it off completely. That is how the Showtime Lakers played the majority role in saving the NBA, and that is how they will always be honored and remembered. Long before Anthony Davis was getting buckets, there was another man known as AD. His name is Adrian Dantley, and to this day, he is one of the most underappreciated players in the history of basketball. Adrian was the definition of a walking bucket, as the guy was methodical and extremely fluid with his offense. He was a 6'5" small forward, but he wasn't the most athletically gifted. On the contrary, he often seemed kinda slow. Don't get me wrong, he definitely had another gear, and could accelerate a little bit if he wanted to. But more often than not, his preference was simply to go through the motions and trust his veteran savviness and fundamentals. Coming into the NBA, he was taken with the 6th overall pick in the 1976 NBA draft by the Buffalo Braves, and it didn't take very long for the 5 teams who passed up on him to start regretting their decision. In his rookie campaign, AD averaged 20 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 1.2 steals on a stellar 52% shooting from the field. In the history of the NBA, only 7 non-centers have averaged over 20 points per game on over 50% shooting from the field in their rookie season, and Dantley is one of them. Thanks to his impressive debut season, he easily won the league's Rookie of the Year award. Now the Braves only finished that season with a 30-52 record, regardless of the fact that the team had some talent, with guys like Bob McAdoo, Randy Smith, and Adrian Dantley. The thing is, Buffalo felt like they had an opportunity to contend, if they just upgraded with veteran star players. So shockingly, they traded Dantley to the Indiana Pacers, in exchange for the all-star Billy Knight, who was coming off of a season where he averaged 27 points per game. This stunning trade made Dantley the first and only Rookie of the Year winner in league history to be immediately traded after winning the award. A motivated Dantley took a massive leap forward in Indiana, and in his first 23 games there, he averaged 26.5 points per game and 9.4 rebounds on 50% shooting from the field. Now here's the thing. At that time in the NBA, the common narrative throughout the league was that a team couldn't win a championship without a great big man, and the Pacers didn't have one. The Los Angeles Lakers had two great centers at that time, in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and in his backup, James Edwards. So in a surprising package deal, the Pacers traded Dantley to the Lakers for James Edwards. In LA, Dantley had a reduced role, as the Lakers already had an array of capable scorers, like Kareem, Norm Nixon, and Jamal Wilkes. In his time with the Lakers, he averaged nearly 20 points per game while making roughly 52% of his shots. After a full season in Los Angeles, the Lakers decided they had enough capable wings, and needed a solid power forward to help out Kareem down low. So Adrian Dantley was traded yet again, this time to the Utah Jazz in exchange for the former MVP winner Spencer Haywood. So let's quickly recap and understand just how crazy this whole thing was. Dantley was a Rookie of the Year winner and had quickly proven himself as one of the best scorers in the entire league. And yet, because of a bunch of very specific circumstances, he had played for 4 different teams in just his first 4 seasons in the NBA, all by the age of 24. Finally in Utah, he was in a situation where he was highly desired and embraced, and he immediately stepped into the role of a team leader and a premier scorer. It was the first All-Star season of his career, as he averaged 28 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists, on an utterly insane 57.6% shooting from the field. He was just getting started though. Over the next 4 seasons straight, Dantley averaged at least 30 points per game in each and every one of those seasons. In the history of the NBA, only 4 players have averaged over 30 points per game in 4 straight seasons. And those players are Wilt Chamberlain, Michael Jordan, Oscar Robertson, and Adrian Dantley. Talk about some incredible company. But here's the craziest part. Of those 4 players, Dantley was easily the most efficient from the field during that scoring streak, as he shot an insane 56% from the field. That would be impressive for an MVP level center, but for a small forward to average over 30 points in 4 straight seasons while shooting 56% is simply jaw-dropping. No other wing player in NBA history has ever been close to achieving what Dantley did in that stretch. Unfortunately, Utah wasn't a very deep team at that time, so despite the historic scoring eruptions, the furthest they made it under Adrian's leadership was the Western Conference semifinals in 1984 and in 1985. In total, Dantley spent 7 seasons with the Utah Jazz, finishing as high as 7th in the MVP race in 1984. In the summer of 1986, the Jazz and Dantley couldn't come to terms on a contract extension to his liking, so the team decided to embrace a rebuild and traded Dantley to the contending Detroit Pistons, in exchange for Kelly Tripucka and Kent Benson. Now Adrian was one of many elite weapons, as Detroit had stars like Isiah Thomas, Joe Dumars, and Bill Laimbeer. He now had to reduce his scoring role, but even with that being the case, he was still incredibly effective with the team, as he averaged roughly 21 points on 52% shooting in his 2.5 seasons in Detroit. As the team's leading scorer, they made it all the way to Game 7 of the 1987 East Finals, where they were eliminated by Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics. Then again, as the team's leading scorer, they made it all the way to the NBA Finals in 1988, where they were controversially eliminated by the Los Angeles Lakers in the 7th and deciding game. After getting extremely close to the mountaintop, the Pistons were poised to make a championship run in 1989, but behind the scenes, things got heated between Adrian Dantley, Isiah Thomas, and the head coach Chuck Daly, as Dantley wanted to be a greater focal point of the offense, and was frustrated that some of his minutes were going to Dennis Rodman. As a result, Detroit traded Dantley to the Dallas Mavericks, in exchange for another scoring star, Mark Aguirre. Part of me wonders if Dantley ever regretted the role he played in his split with the Pistons, because Detroit went on to win the NBA championship that season, and the following season as well. It was at this point that Adrian's career started to rapidly decline, as he was now well into his 30s, and was not quite the same dominant scorer that he once was. By the end of the 1991 NBA season, he had played his final game within the league. Now, to evaluate his career, there are several things that I want you to know about Dantley. His production overall was also insane. For some perspective, let me ask you, just how productive was Kobe Bryant over the 2000s decade, where he was likely the best player in the entire world? Well, here's the averages of Kobe Bryant in the 2000s in comparison to Adrian Dantley's numbers in the 1980s. They were extremely similar, as Kobe averaged 1.7 more points, while Dantley was about 10% more efficient from the field. When you look at it this way, you really begin to understand just how dominant he was as an individual talent. The other thing you need to know about Dantley is that he was quite possibly the most unlucky star in NBA history, because every time he was on the verge of winning a championship, something would happen that took him out of that situation. In 1979, he was traded away from the Los Angeles Lakers, right before they drafted Magic Johnson, and immediately won the championship. In 1986, he was traded away from the Utah Jazz, right before Karl Malone and John Stockton entered the starting lineups, as they became perennial contenders. In 1988, he was screwed out of a ring, as the famous phantom foul call and the controversial end to Game 7 of the 1988 Finals sealed the championship victory for the LA Lakers. And then, during the 1989 season, he was traded away from the Detroit Pistons, right as they went on to win back-to-back NBA championships. Somewhere in an alternate universe, this guy has multiple championship rings, and is properly celebrated as the greatest scorer of his era. But instead, in our current reality, he's only known by basketball superfans as one of the most overlooked and forgotten greats of all time.
This rest stuff just drives me crazy. You're playing basketball for a living, okay? I understand if you're working in a coal mine that you may need a rest day after it. You're playing basketball. The joy that comes with competing in basketball is fun to play. I never got tired in a game. How can you get tired in a game? You're playing basketball. I don't understand this. Honestly, I start thinking I must have missed out on something. The 9 to 5 the guy's doing before he comes to the game. He must be putting in some serious work, in the mine or doing something. Maybe he's a logger. Maybe he's chopping wood. You got all day to sit on your rear end. This rest stuff drives me nuts.
The 1985 to 1986 Boston Celtics won the NBA championship. And with Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and Bill Walton off the bench, they were widely recognized as one of the select few greatest basketball teams of all time. The Celtics brought their core group back for the 86 to 87 season, and they were ready to defend their title. The player who was arguably more ready than anyone else was their second scoring option, Kevin McHale. This 6'10 power forward is widely regarded as one of the greatest power forwards in the history of the league, and to his teammates, he was often referred to as the torture chamber, as he would punish opponents in the low post, with his tremendous footwork, with his solid fundamentals, and with his extremely high release point on his jump shot. He's an NBA Hall of Famer. He won 3 championships with the Celtics, and he earned 6 All-Defense Team selections. The thing is, in this 1987 title defense, what he didn't know is that he was coming up upon one of the most significant nights of his basketball career, which was March 27, 1987. Heading into that regular season matchup against the Chicago Bulls, McHale was averaging a ridiculous 26.4 points, 9.9 rebounds, and 2.3 blocks, on an absurd 61% shooting from the field. In the history of the NBA, there have only been 3 players to average at least 25 points per game while also shooting north of 60% from the field, and Kevin McHale is one of those 3 players. But in this regular season contest against the Bulls, Kevin McHale tragically broke the navicular bone in his right foot. Not only is this injury extremely painful, but especially as a big man, it was extremely dangerous and threatening to his career. Kevin's doctor told him that he should shut it down for the remainder of the season, but McHale ignored the doctor's advice. and he had warned him that his career and his overall health was at risk if he continued to play this season on his broken foot. McHale only missed 3 games due to the injury. Even his superstar teammate Larry Bird publicly said in an interview that Kevin McHale shouldn't be playing for the rest of the season. Listen, if Larry Bird, of all people, who is one of the toughest players in the history of the game, is telling you that you're pushing yourself too hard and should probably sit out, then I have zero doubt that he's absolutely correct. Regardless, he continued to play, and in McHale's first game back against the Detroit Pistons, he scored 25 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks, on 50% shooting from the field, and his Celtics won by 4 points. The very next game, he scored 29 points and had 6 rebounds in a 2-point loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. For the rest of the regular season, which was a total of 6 games, McHale averaged a ridiculous 43.7 minutes per game, which would be a ton for just any regular player. But for a guy on a broken foot is completely unheard of. What's crazy is that it doesn't stop there. McHale played through the remainder of the NBA playoffs, and his Boston Celtics made it all the way to the NBA Finals, where they met up with their rivals, the Los Angeles Lakers. Along the way, Kevin played pretty well, and notably, in a crucial third game against the Milwaukee Bucks, he scored 34 points, 11 rebounds, and 4 blocked shots, while making 60% of his shots. Throughout the East playoffs, he averaged 21 points, 9 rebounds, and 1.6 blocks, on 58.3% shooting. What ensued in the NBA Finals was another epic battle between 2 rivals, and McHale did his usual thing despite the pain, as he averaged 20.5 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, and 1 block, while making 58.5% of his shots, in what was one of the most heroic basketball performances in NBA history. Unfortunately for him, it was all in vain, as the Lakers won the NBA championship and eliminated the Celtics in 6 games. Now here's the thing, because McHale played through the playoffs and didn't shut down his season earlier when the injury first took place, it dramatically affected his basketball career, as he was never the same after this point. His numbers reduced and he just didn't move around as well as he used to. The doctor was right, it did affect his career in the long term. Even Kevin Garnett, who is a Boston Celtics legend and who won the championship with them in 2008, has made some comments about Kevin McHale. And he said that he's noticed how McHale isn't even walking normally for a guy at his age, due to the fact that he played through this injury. So this makes me wonder, at what point is an NBA superstar going too far? I understand there's a lot of old school basketball fans who watch my videos, and you guys are like me, who cherish guys who always go out there and put their best efforts on the court, whether they're healthy or they're injured. A guy who's able to play through injury and help his team win basketball games is displaying his courage, he's displaying his toughness, and he's displaying tremendous perseverance. But at what point is it no longer those characteristics, and instead it looks more like recklessness, or even selfishness, because now you're jeopardizing your entire career and your day-to-day life, which your family certainly cares about. This story about Kevin McHale and his insane toughness has always been a bittersweet story, because on one hand, I feel like he's a hero for it, but on the other hand, it was one of the most reckless moves in basketball history, and he suffered the consequences for it. So with all that being said, please let me know in the comment section below, do you think there is such a thing as an NBA athlete going too far? And where do you draw that line?
There have been a lot of impressive things that MJ has accomplished throughout his career, but one of the things that I personally think was the most impressive was something that a lot of basketball fans don't even know he did. Many of the greatest players in the modern game operate as the team's floor general. They might not be listed as the point guard on the scouting report, but let's make no mistake, many of these superstars are controlling the offense as if they're the team's point. What this translates to is simply higher production and higher averages across the board. Typically, when a player is appointed as a point guard or as the team's floor general, his usage rate increases as he naturally becomes a more ball-dominant player. This is one of the main reasons why players like James Harden had their assist numbers dramatically increase after being moved to the point guard position. It wasn't that he all of a sudden became a great passer, but instead, it was the fact that the offense was now ran through him, which naturally boosted his numbers. As great and as record-shattering as Jordan's numbers were, for the most part, he never had this luxury working in his favor and boosting his numbers, like many other greats have. Well, that is, with a small exception of the final quarter of the 1988-89 season. At the time, the Bulls had a 34-24 record and were looking to move up in the standings. The Bulls head coach Doug Collins noticed how Jordan had been having a significant impact in numerous ways on the court, as he was putting up his best all-around numbers of his young career. This is when Collins decided to make a significant change that was pretty uncommon during that era. Collins moved the 6'6" Jordan from his usual shooting guard position to the point guard spot as a way to pick up the tempo of the offense and allow Jordan to have more control over the game. What ensued was one of the most dominant individual stretches of NBA history. On the very first game against the Seattle Supersonics, Jordan firmly established himself as a distributor as he handed out a remarkable 15 assists. The very next game against the Indiana Pacers, Jordan had 21 points, 14 assists, and 14 rebounds in only 30 minutes of playing time due to a 32-point beatdown. He would have had a realistic shot at the historic 20-20-20 game if he had played his regular workload of minutes. Jordan remained at the point guard position for the final 24 games of the season, and in those games, he averaged 30.4 points, 9.2 rebounds, 10.7 assists, and 2.5 steals on 49.8% shooting. To go along with this ridiculous near triple-double average, Jordan had a streak of 7 straight triple-doubles and 10 triple-doubles in 11 games. In the game that Jordan didn't get a triple-double, he poured in 40 points, 11 assists, and 7 rebounds on 61.1% shooting. On another night, in a 15-point victory against the Blazers, Jordan dropped 34 points, 17 assists, 7 rebounds, and 6 steals on 50% shooting. Those 17 assists were his career high. This game against Portland was also the beginning of an incredible streak that I rarely hear anyone mention. Over a 12-game stretch, Jordan had at least 10 assists in every single contest. To put in perspective just how incredible that 12-game streak is, consider the fact that all-time great distributors and stat stuffers like Oscar Robertson, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Jason Kidd have never had a streak longer than MJ's of games with at least 10 assists. To put it simply, Michael Jordan wasn't just great at the point guard position, but he appeared to be playing like he was the greatest point guard of all time. This was just one end of the court though. Despite spending so much energy on offense as a point guard, Jordan still had the responsibility of locking down opposing perimeter players, and unlike players who use their offensive load as an excuse for their lack of defensive intensity, Jordan still brought it on the defensive end every single night. Not only was Jordan 3rd overall in steals per game, but he also finished that season on the NBA's first team all-defense. He was 5th overall in defensive win shares, 1st overall in defensive plus-minus, and finished that season in the 5th spot for the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year. Jordan and the Bulls made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they were eliminated in 6 games by the bad boy Detroit Pistons. After yet another defeat at the hand of Detroit, Chicago's management decided that it was time to shake things up and fired Doug Collins from his head coaching position. He was replaced with the legendary Phil Jackson, and thus the triangle offense was implemented, and Jordan's days as a point guard were now behind him. Jordan's numbers at the point were utterly insane, but let's be honest, his numbers earlier that season, before he switched positions, were pretty nuts too. The major what-if question that this video raises is what if Jordan had remained at the point guard position throughout his career? How would that have affected his career numbers? Well, at the very least, we can make an educated guess based on how Jordan's numbers adjusted during the 1989 season. You'll see that from his 57 games as the shooting guard to his 24 games as the point guard, his scoring decreased by about 9%, His rebounding increased by around 17%, and his assists dramatically increased by a whopping 35%. So now, if we take those same percentages and apply them to Jordan's career numbers, we're now looking at averages of 27.4 points, 7.3 rebounds, and 7.2 assists per game. What I can't help but notice is how Jordan's career numbers as a point guard are strikingly similar to another all-time great who consistently ran his offense like a quarterback, and that is LeBron James. With MJ's adjusted averages, their career numbers are now nearly identical to one another. Obviously, over time, this change in play style could have affected other aspects of Jordan's game, like an increase in turnovers, potentially more injuries due to his increased workload, and maybe he even wins less championships as a point guard rather than playing within the system of the triangle offense. It's impossible to say for sure, but at the very least, this perfectly summarizes how a player's perception, production, and impact can dramatically change with a simple switch of a position.
The greatest all-around player of all time. What does this mean exactly? When we're talking about this subject, I think most people mean it in terms of a variety of elite abilities. Is he a top scorer, a top passer, a top rebounder, a top defender, and so on? Usually, when this debate comes up, you'll hear two players get mentioned quite a bit: LeBron James and Michael Jordan. Let me make this clear. This video is not intended to be a criticism against either of those players. Both Jordan and LeBron are immensely talented in a variety of ways, and each of those players have a legitimate argument for that title. But the thing is, I think Larry Bird's case is just as strong, but for some reason, he's almost never given that same level of recognition on this particular topic. Now let me break down the main reasons why I think Bird's case is so strong. For one, Larry Bird has no weaknesses in his game. Think about how rare that actually is, even when considering some of the GOAT candidates. It can be argued that Michael Jordan's weakness was his three-point shooting, especially earlier in his career. LeBron James is a below-average free throw shooter. Magic Johnson wasn't a great defensive player. Wilt Chamberlain and Shaquille O'Neal were terrible free throw shooters. In several seasons, Kobe Bryant wasn't very efficient from the field, and Bill Russell was a very limited scorer. On the other hand, Larry Bird was an elite scorer overall. He was tremendously efficient from the field, from three-point range, and from the free throw line. He was an elite rebounder, especially considering his position. He was an elite passer, he was a clutch performer, and he was an NBA All-Defender. I challenge you to find one thing that Larry Bird wasn't good at. The other major reason is Larry was arguably a top 10 player of all time in several major categories. First off, scoring. When you consider the greatest scorers in NBA history and factor in a player's scoring efficiency, Larry Bird simply has to be in that conversation. He had a career scoring average of 24.3, which is only slightly behind the career scoring average of Kobe Bryant. He also has the second most 50-40-90 seasons in NBA history, trailing only Steve Nash, and Nash was never the 25 to 30 points per game player that Bird usually was. Over a 5-year stretch, from 1985 to 1989, Larry Bird averaged 28 points on 50-40-90 percentages. That level of sustained scoring efficiency is basically unmatched by the rest of NBA history. So again, he's arguably a top 10 scorer of all time. He's also arguably a top 10 rebounder in NBA history, when you consider the position he played. According to StatMuse, among small forwards, Bird has the 4th highest rebounds per game average in NBA history at 10.1. The thing is, every other player in the top 8 spots all played in the 1960s, which was easily the most inflated rebounding era in the game's history, and that was due to lower field goal percentages and a faster pace of play. The closest small forward to Larry Bird in rebounds per game who didn't play in the 1960s was Shawn Marion, who wasn't even close to Larry's numbers. He was able to accomplish this thanks to his 6'9" frame, thanks to his all-out play style, and because of his intelligence on the court. In clutch situations, he dominated the boards to an even greater extent. For goodness sake, in the 1984 NBA Finals, Bird averaged 14 rebounds per game over the course of the series, compared to the Lakers' Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who averaged 8.1. In the 1981 Finals, Bird averaged 15.3 rebounds, going toe-to-toe with the legendary rebounder Moses Malone. When you consider the era and the position he played, Bird is not only a top 10 scorer of all time, but he's also a potential top 10 rebounder of all time. Then you have Bird as a passer. He had creativity and court vision that was very nearly on the level of the great Magic Johnson. At times, it looked as if Bird had eyes in the back of his head with some of the passes he was making. Among small forwards, Larry has the second highest assists per game average of all time, ahead of Scottie Pippen and trailing only LeBron James. But unlike LeBron James and Scottie Pippen, Bird's assists per game average actually increased in the postseason. When I recently did a video on the top 10 passers of all time, I had Bird as an honorable mention. And good lord, that created a whole bunch of backlash in the comments section. For me, he's in the 11 to 13 range. But at the very least, we can all agree that he's arguably a top 10 passer. Beyond that, there's three-point shooting. Bird is tied for the most three-point contest victories in NBA history with a total of 3, which he won in consecutive seasons. In the 1980s, he was regularly among the league leaders in both three-point percentage and in three-pointers attempted. He has every kind of three-point shot in his arsenal, as he could hit them while off balance, he could pull up in transition, and he could catch and shoot. Throw in the fact that he was one of the most clutch three-point shooters to ever live, and yeah, at the very least, Bird has an argument for being a top 10 three-point shooter. So to recap, he's arguably a top 10 scorer all time, a top 10 rebounder, a top 10 passer, and a top 10 three-point shooter. Now Bird is not a top 10 defensive player, but without a doubt in my mind, he's an extremely underrated defensive player. One thing he was known for was always giving his best energy and effort on the defensive end. You're going to be hard-pressed to find a substantial amount of footage of Bird being lazy on defense, as his blue-collar, grit-and-grind personality translated seamlessly to the court. Although he wasn't the fastest player on the court, he was extremely quick with his hands, as Bird was regularly among the league leaders in steals per game, as he averaged 1.7 over the course of his career. He was also an above-average shot blocker for his position, as he averaged 0.84 over the course of his career, which is actually a higher blocks per game average than proven defensive small forwards like LeBron James and Kawhi Leonard. Bird has 3 all-defense team selections on his resume, and even finished as high as 3rd overall in the Defensive Player of the Year rankings in 1983. If it wasn't for his humility, he would likely be the NBA's record holder for the most steals in a single game, seeing how he got a total of 9 in only 3 quarters against the Utah Jazz in 1985. Despite sitting out the 4th, Bird was just 1 steal shy of the illustrious quadruple-double. I promise, I'm not trying to convince you that he was basically Dennis Rodman on the defensive end. But at the very least, Bird was an elite defensive player who usually isn't recognized as such by modern fans. Again, to sum this all up, Larry Legend had basically no weakness in his game, while being top tier in many different aspects of the game. This is why I believe he has a formidable case for being the most complete basketball player in NBA history. There are some other candidates that I would consider as well. Guys like Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Hakeem Olajuwon. But at the end of the day, when all things are considered, Bird might just be my ultimate choice. So there's been many different eras in basketball history, and in specifically the 80s, that decade is known for a few major aspects. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird's rivalry, the beginning of Michael Jordan's career, and of course, the Bad Boy Pistons. But outside of that, there's still many talented teams and players who don't get the attention they deserve. Today, upon viewer request, I'm diving into the Western Conference in the 1980s as we evaluate how good and how deep that conference was at this period. We're starting off with the most obvious team, the Los Angeles Lakers. They were a legitimate super team led by their trio of Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and James Worthy. We already know a ton about the first two. Magic Johnson was the greatest point guard of basketball history, who led the Lakers' fast-paced and high-octane offense to earn the nickname Showtime. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, known as the captain, was still an elite center in the league, although he was past his prime days of the 1970s. Still, he fit in beautifully as a big man in Magic's fast break. And when the Lakers chose to slow it down, there was no better way to get a sure bucket than dropping it into the post where Kareem could use his indefensible skyhook shot. The guy who's the most underrated one in this mix is big game James Worthy, whose nickname was very fitting considering the fact that he was one of the most clutch performers the game has ever seen. He averaged around 20 points per game during his prime, and the 6'9" small forward had one of the quickest first steps the game has ever seen. I've said this before and I'll say it again. James Worthy deserves his own statue outside of Staples Center. Without him, the Lakers certainly don't win the 1998 NBA championship over the Pistons in 7 games. In that 7th and deciding game, James dropped 36, 16, and 10 on 68% shooting and was named the Finals MVP of that series. Along with that all-time great trio, they also had a significant amount of depth, including their 6'5" shooting guard, Michael Cooper, who was a part of all 5 of their championship runs that decade. Cooper was one of the original 3-and-D type of players, and he's one of the great defensive players that most young viewers have never heard of. He made 8 straight all-defense teams that decade and was the 1987 Defensive Player of the Year. They also had a quality transition scorer in Byron Scott, and they also had a 6th Man of the Year candidate, Michael Thompson, in the second half of the decade. Considering how overpowered this juggernaut was, it's no wonder they represented the West in the NBA Finals 8 out of 10 seasons. The second team we're looking at is the Houston Rockets. They were not great in the first half of the decade, but after acquiring Hakeem Olajuwon in the 1984 draft, that all would quickly change. The Twin Tower combination of Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon quickly made them prominent contenders in the West. They also had key scoring sparks like Lewis Lloyd and Robert Reed. They made it as far as the NBA Finals in 1986, and after they had defeated the favored Lakers in the West Finals, the hype around this team was immense. With Hakeem at the age of 23 and Sampson at the age of 25, it seemed as if it was only a matter of time before the league was theirs. Unfortunately, their success was short-lived, and so was the career of Sampson, as he began dealing with significant back and knee problems that had him out of the league by the time he was barely into his 30s. The next team is one of the less talked about and fascinating gems of the 1980s, and that's the Denver Nuggets. They were led by 2 solid and relatively unknown stars, Alex English and Fat Lever. Of all the players in the entirety of the 1980s, no one scored more total points than Alex English, who averaged as high as 29.8 points per game in 1986. He was an incredibly efficient 6'7" small forward who had a lethal mid-range jump shot with an extremely high release point that was rarely blocked, which led him to make 8 straight All-Star teams in that era. His co-star was the 6'3" point guard / shooting guard Lafayette Lever, known as Fat Lever for short. Lever was a pretty good distributor and a reliable scorer who was very close to 20 points per game during his prime. With this duo leading the way, Denver had an extremely fast and potent offense. In 6 out of the 10 seasons that decade, Denver led all teams in points scored. They were a contender, and they had a potential championship team if it wasn't for one major problem. They were terrible defensively, and when I say terrible, I mean excruciatingly awful. The concept was basically that the best defense was more offense. Every season that decade, they finished as a bottom 5 team in points allowed, including 4 straight seasons where they were the worst in the entire league. Despite all of their defensive woes, this team still made it to the conference semifinals 4 times, and they made it to the Western Conference Finals in 1985, where they lost in 5 games to the eventual champion Los Angeles Lakers. Then there was the Utah Jazz, who were among the worst teams in the league for the first half of the decade. But around the mid-80s is when they added Karl Malone and John Stockton, and their fortunes began to shift. Malone and Stockton are most famously known for their 2 trips to the NBA Finals in 1997 and 1998, but their best seasons statistically actually came in the late 80s. Nobody really reflects on the 80s Jazz as a Big 3 team, but you could, considering the underrated big man they had down low, the 7'4" monster, Mark Eaton. Despite not being very well known, Mark was one of the greatest defensive players to ever live. To say that it was difficult to score over Mark in the paint would be a massive understatement, as he made 5 all-defense teams, was the Defensive Player of the Year twice, and he led the league in blocks 4 times, including the 1985 season where he averaged 5.6 blocks per game. Officially, that's the highest blocks per game average for a season in NBA history. They also had one of the forgotten great leapers of years past, the 6'4" shooting guard Darrell Griffith. Darrell could score and he had a reliable jump shot, but what he was known for more than anything was his incredible dunks, which earned him the nickname Dr. Dunkenstein. He wasn't a great defensive player, but he scored over 20 points a game for his first 5 seasons. Unfortunately, injuries shortened his career, and he began having those injuries right around the time that Malone and Stockton joined the team, so their prime didn't quite overlap, as he was only a 10 to 15 points per game scorer by the time that Malone and Stockton broke out as superstars. Despite being rich in talent, they still were not able to get past Magic Johnson's super team, getting as far as Game 7 of the 1988 West Semifinals, where the eventual champion Lakers closed it out. Another team who was making deep runs in the West playoffs was the well-balanced Dallas Mavericks. Their leading star was the elite scorer, Mark Aguirre, who spent his prime 8 seasons with the Dallas Mavericks before he eventually won 2 championships with the Bad Boy Pistons. He put up strong numbers in his years as a Maverick, averaging as high as 29.5 points per game in 1984. His co-star was the reliable and consistently good scorer, Rolando Blackman. The 6'6" guard was another one of those great mid-range shooters of the 80s, and his prime years saw about 20 points per game on over 50% shooting. Some great role players got their start there as well, like one of the original stretch 4 shooters, the 6'9" Sam Perkins, and a future 6th Man of the Year, the 6'10" Detlef Schrempf. At their best 3-year stretch with their many weapons, this unit was seen as a legitimate threat to the Lakers. And in 1988, they made it to the Western Conference Finals, where they pushed Magic, Kareem, and Worthy's Lakers to 7 games before Los Angeles closed it out. The last one to highlight is more so a player than an entire team, and that's the 6'10" power forward Tom Chambers. He was a 4-time All-Star and one of the premier scorers of that decade. His greatest performance was a 60-point explosion in a revenge game against his former team. He was an incredible athlete who could play above the rim and has one of the most ridiculous-looking dunks of all time. He spent most of his years in the 80s with the Seattle Supersonics, but it wasn't until he joined the Phoenix Suns that he got his first taste of competing. In 1989, Chambers and Kevin Johnson led the Suns to a 55-27 record, while Chambers was averaging over 25 points per game. They then cruised to the Western Conference Finals before they were swept by the defending champion Lakers. These were pretty much all of the competing teams in the Western Conference during the 80s. Although I do think there was some pretty solid teams, and you could certainly argue that the West 80s was underrated, they certainly weren't as strong as the fiercely competitive Eastern Conference. In the 1980s, there were 25 50-win teams in the Western Conference. In the 80s for the Eastern Conference, there was 35 50-win teams, which pretty much sums up the balance of power during that decade. And that's certainly interesting because it's arguably the last decade we've seen where the East was stronger than the West. The West in the 80s certainly wasn't one of the greatest conferences we've ever seen, but due to the rich Eastern Conference in that decade, and due to the overpowered Lakers representing the West in the NBA Finals 8 out of 10 years, there have unfortunately been some nice teams and quality players who become lost and overlooked in the game's history. Hopefully this video helped shine a spotlight on some of them.
Throughout the decades, there have been several great two-way players who left their lasting imprint on the league. Guys like Hakeem Olajuwon, Scottie Pippen, Gary Payton, and even more recent stars like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. But one of the all-time great two-way players who seems to fly under the radar everywhere other than on my channel is the Milwaukee Bucks legend Sidney Moncrief. This 6'4" point guard / shooting guard was an absolute problem in the 1980s. For some reason, he's rarely mentioned when discussing the all-time great two-way players. But back in his era, everyone knew that he was one of the most dreaded one-on-one matchups in the entire league, and on both ends of the court. So in order for us to understand what kind of player he was, let's start, as we always do, by taking it back to the beginning of his career. Moncrief was drafted by the Milwaukee Bucks with the 5th overall pick in the 1979 draft, out of the University of Arkansas. Obviously, Magic Johnson took all of the headlines as the first pick in that historic draft. But the next best player to come out of the class of '79 was in fact Moncrief. He had a somewhat slow start to his career, and in his rookie season, he averaged just 8 points in 20 minutes of action, on a Bucks team that was still finding its groove. He didn't truly arrive until his third season in the league, which was his first year as an NBA All-Star. As the team's leader in points, assists, and rebounds, he led his Bucks to a 55-27 record, good enough for the second seed in the Eastern Conference. As a solid pickpocket and a smothering on-ball defender, there's a good chance that he would have won the Defensive Player of the Year award that season if the award had actually existed at that point in history. But his time would soon come after. The Defensive Player of the Year award was introduced to the NBA in the 1982-83 season, and Moncrief went on to win the award in its first 2 seasons of existence, in 1983 and 1984. To this very day, he's the only guard in NBA history to win the award multiple times. Not only was he a lockdown defender, but his skills continue to improve on the offensive end. As an athletically gifted slasher, he had his best season offensively in 1983, where he averaged over 22 points per game on 52.4% shooting. Typically, 6'4" guards struggle to be a high scorer while averaging north of 50% from the field. Not only did Moncrief do that in 1983, but he actually shot better than 50% from the field over the course of his career. From 1982 to 1986, he was an All-Star in 5 straight seasons. But beyond the fact that his individual abilities were shining, he was also leading his team to be a consistent contender in the Eastern Conference. For some reason, when people talk about the 1980s Eastern Conference, people seem to only think of the Celtics, the Pistons, the Bulls, and the 76ers. But the thing is, the Bucks were always in that mix as well. From 1981 to 1987, Moncrief led his Bucks to have at least 50 wins in 7 straight seasons, including trips to the Eastern Conference Finals in 1983, 1984, and 1986. One shocking accomplishment was when his Bucks swept Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics out of the 1983 semifinals, 4-0. Larry Bird has since went on to describe that series as the most embarrassing moment of his life. In those semifinals, Moncrief led all players in scoring while leading his team in assists and steals. Eliminating Bird and the Celtics in the midst of their dynasty days was no easy task. But one of the greatest achievements of his career is what he accomplished in the 1985 NBA playoffs. When people think of Michael Jordan's playoff exits before Scottie Pippen developed into a co-star, they usually think of their losses at the hands of the Celtics and Pistons. But the thing is, neither of those teams were actually the first team to eliminate Michael Jordan from the playoffs. That was Sidney Moncrief and his Milwaukee Bucks. With the help of his co-star, Terry Cummings, the Bucks dominated the Bulls, winning the series in 4 games, 3-1. In that historic series, the 2-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, Sidney Moncrief, contained Michael Jordan to only 43.6% shooting over the course of the series. And then, when it came to the offensive end, Sidney averaged 26.5 points, nearly 5 rebounds, and nearly 5 assists, on far greater than 50-40-90 percentages over the course of the series. At the end of the day, I can't say enough positive things about this incredibly overlooked guard. Being the only guard to win back-to-back DPOYs is a special achievement in and of itself. But doing it in an era where he had to consistently guard guys like Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Dominique Wilkins, and Clyde Drexler is just overwhelmingly impressive. Although he was one of the best players in the league during his prime, and although he's one of the greatest two-way players of all time, unfortunately, he didn't have very great longevity due to his degenerative knee issues and significant heel issues that drastically limited his productivity as he entered his late 20s. The drop-off was dramatic, and by the age of 29, he was only a shell of what he once was. At the age of 31, he retired from the NBA and spent an entire year away from professional basketball. When he was 33 years old, he came back to the NBA as a member of the Atlanta Hawks. but he only had very minor contributions throughout the course of the regular season. He did manage to have one amazing flashback when he dropped 23 points in just 22 minutes in Game 4 of the first round against Detroit. The Hawks were eventually eliminated in 5 games, and Moncrief shelved his sneakers for good. In total, he made 5 All-Star teams, 5 All-NBA teams, 5 All-Defense teams, and was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, and is a Basketball Hall of Famer. Some of the greatest players of all time remember the impact of Moncrief quite well. For example, Michael Jordan said this about the Bucks star: "When you play against Moncrief, you're in for a night of all-around basketball. He'll hound you everywhere you go, both ends of the court. You just expect it." Larry Bird had this to say as well: "Moncrief does everything you're supposed to do on defense and doesn't take any shortcuts. Plus he does it every night." To me, what's mind-blowing is how he's rarely discussed among the greatest perimeter defenders in NBA history. Usually guys like Gary Payton, Michael Jordan, and even Kobe Bryant take all of the spotlight. But I think if you ask players who actually played against him in the 1980s, there's a very good chance that they have Moncrief in the top spot overall ahead of all those other legends. As for myself personally, well, it's tough to rank players defensively when there's so much nuance involved. At the very least, I have him as a top 5 perimeter defender on my all-time rankings.
How successful is Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen? How successful is Shaquille O'Neal without Kobe Bryant? Or how about Magic Johnson without Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? No superstar players win multiple championships without any help, and especially without a co-star. Maybe the most slept-on co-star in NBA history is Joe Dumars of the Bad Boy Pistons. The Pistons of the late 80s and early 90s were one of the deepest and most talented teams of all time. They were led by their smiling assassin Isiah Thomas, who famously took his team to 3 straight NBA Finals from 1988 to 1990, as they won back-to-back championships in 89 and 90. And who knows, if it wasn't for one of the most controversial foul calls in the 1988 NBA Finals, then they likely would have won 3 straight championships. Now when it comes to this historic team that was a borderline dynasty, people think of Isiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer. Maybe even throw in Dennis Rodman and Rick Mahorn. I think most people would agree that those guys are the faces of the team. After all, Isiah was the leader and the greatest player on that roster, while Laimbeer, Mahorn, and Rodman were the players who brought the attitude and swagger that made them the Bad Boy Pistons. With that being said, somehow, the second best player on the team has been largely forgotten and overlooked in basketball lore. Make no mistake, Joe Dumars was not just a role player, but he was very much a star who was talented enough to be the leader of his own team. Joe's talent and impact is overlooked for one major reason. He was the good boy on the Bad Boy Pistons. Whenever there was a fight or altercation, the one guy who usually wasn't involved was Joe Dumars. He wasn't a trash talker, and unlike Isiah Thomas, his game wasn't incredibly flashy. Sure, it had some elements of excitement and dazzling ball handling, but relatively, he was seen as the more stoic one. He simply showed up and did his job, humbly, quietly, and effectively, which I think is why he is often forgotten. Because as great as he was, his personality and approach simply didn't match the identity of his team, that ultimately made them famous. Michael Jordan was the arch nemesis of the Pistons during that era, and he has publicly stated that he hates Isiah Thomas and the Pistons, and that this hatred still burns to this very day. The thing is, as much as MJ hates this squad, the one player he has always spoken positively about is Joe Dumars. MJ is on record saying, "My toughest battles were with Joe Dumars. No one plays tougher than Joe. He thought well and he was very smart about his defense. I think he approaches the game as trying to dissect his opponents and try to find weaknesses and try to force them to do things they didn't feel comfortable doing. He introduced certain tricks to make me expand my talents as an offensive player, and that's why I consider him the best." So at this point, you might be asking yourself, who really was Joe Dumars? So you've heard me explain his approach, and you've heard Michael Jordan give his thoughts. But what was his game like? Well, Joe Dumars was a 6'3" shooting guard who was taken by the Pistons in the 1985 NBA draft. And as he ascended to star status, the Pistons were becoming serious title contenders. And trust me, that correlation is no coincidence. He was a shifty guard with a fantastic handle and a killer crossover, but it was extremely tight and safe, as he was never the kind of guy to lead the team in turnovers. He had the speed to blow by his defender and finish at the rim, but he was also a deadly pull-up shooter. So if you played him too close, you were in danger of getting beat to the rim. But if they gave him too much space, then he would simply take advantage by burying perimeter shots. He didn't shoot a ton of three-point shots in his career, as he was very selective with his attempts. But when he did shoot them, he was one of the most efficient in the entire league, as he made 38% over the course of his career, which is solid by today's standards. But in the 1980s, it was especially lethal. Beyond that, he was a remarkable passer, who was always quick to find the open man and deliver the basketball with extreme precision. As Jordan talked about earlier, Dumars was an elite perimeter defender. Sure, the bad boy Pistons are famous for their quote Jordan rules, where they would use guys like Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn to physically punish Jordan whenever he got to the paint. But on the perimeter, it was Dumars who always defended him cleanly and effectively. Broadway Joe earned 5 All-Defense Team selections in his NBA career, with 4 of those being first team. During their first championship season in 1989, he averaged 17 points and 6 assists, while making 50% of his shots, 48% of his three-point shots, and 85% of his free throws, while simultaneously being viewed as the best defensive player at his position that season. He was even better in the playoffs, as he led his team in scoring in the first round against the Boston Celtics, and in the NBA Finals against the defending champion Lakers. In those finals, Los Angeles could do nothing to slow him down, as he dropped 33 points in a 3-point victory in Game 2, and then 31 points in a 4-point victory in Game 3. This Lakers team was undefeated throughout the Western Conference playoffs, with an 11-0 record, and the Pistons proceeded to sweep them on the game's biggest stage, with Joe Dumars leading the pack, as he averaged 27 points and 6 assists on 58% shooting over the course of the series. Naturally, he was awarded the Finals MVP for his tremendous play. During their second championship season, Dumars was again solid, including an impressive performance in the Eastern Conference Finals against Jordan and the Bulls. In that 7-game series, Dumars led the Pistons in scoring while simultaneously defending the greatest player in the sport. People who watched this team win as it happened completely understand that Dumars wasn't just a part of their championship success, but he was as pivotal as it gets. What's interesting is that this wasn't even the prime of his career, as he was still only in his mid-20s. But the Pistons team would slowly decline over the next few seasons, as older veterans like Isiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer were reaching their twilight phase. So even though Dumars was reaching his prime, he didn't have the talent around him that he once did. For example, in the 92-93 season, Dumars averaged a career-high 23.5 points per game while securing an MVP vote. But it would only translate to a 40-42 record, as the Pistons were now one of the oldest teams in the entire league. He stuck around for a while and remained effective. He never left the Detroit Pistons, but he did end up retiring in 1999 at the age of 36. During his retirement ceremony, Ken Calvert, the longtime PA announcer of the Detroit Pistons, described Joe Dumars as the backbone of their championship teams. He said, whatever the team needed, whether it was a triple, a floater, or a post-up, or maybe checking Magic, or Michael, Joe did that. All in all, he was a 6-time All-Star, a 5-time All-Defender, a 2-time NBA champion, a Finals MVP, and a Sportsmanship Award winner in 1996. Say what you want about the Bad Boy Pistons, but you can't have an honest conversation about that championship squad without talking about the good boy, Joe Dumars.
The late 80s and early 90s was an era filled with elite point guards who each left their mark on the league. Due to this rich and intense level of competition, some of those players flew under the media radar and were underappreciated when they played, let alone the years after they retired. That brings us to William Mark Price, the 6-foot point guard who spent the majority of his career as a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Coming out of Georgia Tech, Price didn't have the highest expectations heading into the league, as he was selected with only the 25th overall pick in the 1986 draft by the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks did not feel too enthusiastic about the undersized guard, so they traded Price to the Cleveland Cavaliers for just a second-round pick in the distant 1989 draft, which eventually became a player named Jeff Hodge, and Hodge never went on to play an NBA game. It would take him a bit for him to send a message to the Mavericks, as his rookie season was spent mostly on the bench behind decent guards in John Bagley and Ron Harper. Due to this, he had very modest averages in his rookie campaign, and a young and rebuilding Cavs team finished with only a 31-51 record. Some of his talent was noticed though, so he was given the starting point guard spot to begin the 87-88 season, and he wouldn't disappoint. Now with Price's skills on full display, people could see how he was one of the best ball handlers in the entire league, and was extremely efficient at splitting the double teams and splitting the pick and roll on his way to the basket. He was also an extremely quick guard with a high top speed, yet he never seemed to be out of control thanks to his sound decision making, his high basketball IQ, and thanks to his incredible handle of a basketball. He also immediately made his presence known as one of the best perimeter shooters in the league, as he shot an absurd 48.6% from three-point range in his sophomore season. His ability to facilitate the ball was also noticed, and was a skill that would only improve dramatically as the years would go on. He also put up solid averages in his 32 minutes per game and led his Cavs to a much improved winning record of 42-40. His third season would be his historic breakout year and his team's breakout year as well, as the Cavs finished with a strong 57-25 record. This was mostly due to Mark Price's 50-40-90 season, which means he shot north of 50% from the field, 40% from three-point range, and 90% from the free throw line over the course of the season. It's an elite group of only 9 players in NBA history. There's no question that he deserved the majority of the credit for his team's success, as Price led the Cavs in scoring, he led the team in assists, and he led the entire team in efficiency in terms of true shooting percentage. Unfortunately for Mark, another theme of his career would begin in that postseason, as his Cavs were eliminated by the Chicago Bulls in the deciding 5th game thanks to Jordan's iconic buzzer beater. Over the next handful of years, Price's Cavs would be eliminated by the Chicago Bulls dynasty a whopping 5 times, which explains a couple things. 1, why he may have been so underappreciated, and 2, why his Cavs just couldn't get over the hump despite being consistent contenders in the Eastern Conference. The closest he got to the NBA Finals was in the 1992 season, where his Cavs made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they pushed Jordan and Pippen's 67-win Bulls to 6 games before they eventually came up short. None of the blame belonged on Mark, as he was a monster that series, leading his team in points and assists while putting up his usual ridiculous efficiency splits. Over the prime of his career, Price was selected to 4 All-Star teams and 4 All-NBA teams, which might not seem like a ton, but when you consider the level of competition he had at the point guard position, it begins to make a lot of sense. One of the more interesting parts about his career was his ACL tear in December of 1990 in a regular season game against the Atlanta Hawks. Some could experience an ACL tear as a career-altering injury, but this was not the case for Mark, as he recovered well and came back even better the following season, going on to make 3 straight All-Star appearances after returning from the injury. I talked about his extremely efficient shooting earlier, but I haven't quite thoroughly explained just how impressive it actually was. Price is a player who would have absolutely loved to have played in the modern NBA, where high-volume three-point shooting is the expectation. He was a fantastic shooter off the dribble, and he had a lethal pull-up jumper in transition. One of my favorite All-Star Game memories was the way he put on a show with his three-point shooting in the 1993 All-Star Weekend, as he not only won the three-point shootout on Saturday night, but he was also sniping away during the All-Star Game, making 6 three-pointers in quick succession, and nearly won the All-Star Game MVP as a result. Only 7 players in NBA history have won the three-point shootout multiple times, and Mark Price is one of those players, as he won the contest in 1993 and 1994. In those contests, he defeated some of the greatest snipers of all time, like Reggie Miller, Craig Hodges, and Steve Kerr. Not only that, but he's one of the most punishing players ever from the charity stripe, as he led the league in free throw percentage a total of 3 times, and he currently sits in 3rd place on the NBA's all-time list of the most efficient free throw shooters, hitting a remarkable 90.4% over the course of his career. In many ways, Price was the model of efficiency at the point guard position, as he not only had a 50-40-90 season under his belt, but he was just a little shy of having a 50-40-90 career, as he shot 47.2% from the field, 40.2% from three-point range, and 90.4% from the free throw line. A couple of skill sets that he's often compared to is Steve Nash's and Steph Curry's, and honestly, I think both of those comparisons are extremely accurate. Another skill I haven't yet mentioned is how Price was solid at moving without the basketball and would often come off screens with just a second to shoot, and would do so with excellent precision, which again is extremely similar to the way Steph Curry plays. Pistons legend Isiah Thomas had this to say about the Cavaliers' great. Price was one of the greatest shooters I've ever seen. His shot making, his foul shooting, and his speed made him almost unguardable in that era. When you look at Price's career as a whole, you'll see solid numbers and a massive impact on a historically weak franchise. But what's unfortunate is that his career could have stood out much more if his health had lasted longer. Due to accumulating injuries to his feet and knees, Price finished out his final few seasons as a journeyman, playing for the Bullets, the Warriors, and lastly, the Magic, before eventually retiring after the 1998 season at only the age of 34. All in all, to hardcore basketball fans, Price is remembered as one of the all-time great point guards, and as a weapon who was ahead of his time. And to the casual basketball fan, he's easily one of the most underrated and underappreciated players of basketball history. Another way of putting it is that he was the greatest Cavalier of the pre-LeBron James era, as he trails only LeBron on the Cavs' all-time assists and steals list while being 5th in scoring.
The world is a much different place than it was 10 years ago, as there is more constant information at our fingertips than ever before. Any single play, action, or moment can go absolutely viral in an instant. Within a matter of minutes, the entire sports world can be made aware of a significant event, and before you know it, everyone is chiming in with their thoughts and emotions. But NBA basketball hasn't always been this way. Many things have happened in years past that were jaw-dropping developments, and if those same developments were to take place in today's world, they would absolutely break the internet. One of the most shocking and insane events of basketball history took place nearly 4 decades ago. On November 9th, 1984, the 2 favorites in the Eastern Conference were meeting up for their first matchup of the regular season, the defending champion Boston Celtics and the previous champions, the Philadelphia 76ers. At this point in history, Boston and Philadelphia had one of the fiercest ongoing rivalries, as the 76ers represented the old guard with their battle-tested veterans, and the Celtics were the youthful rising power in the conference. Every time these teams met up, an epic battle was expected, not just because of the immense talent on both sides, but also because of the intense physical nature of both teams, and neither side was willing to back down. Just recently before this game was a preseason game. The Celtics' Cedric Maxwell and Phillies' Moses Malone got into a violent fight, which was soon followed up with another intense fight between Larry Bird and Mark Ivoroni, which resulted in ejections. Again, this was the intensity of the 2 teams meeting in a preseason game. Now, this upcoming game on November 9th was nationally televised, and was one of the more highly anticipated regular season games of NBA history. Not just for the rivalry, the star power, and the fact that they had won the previous 2 championships, but it was also for the fact that both of these teams were undefeated. The 2 faces of the Eastern Conference, Larry Bird and Julius Erving, found themselves in a heated individual battle.
Anytime two superstars clash on the basketball court is sure to garner attention, but it's something else entirely for those two stars to get into an actual heated fight. Now up to this point, both of these superstars actually got along pretty well as friends, and highly respected one another's abilities. You wouldn't know it though, based on how things unfolded on the court. The game was now underway, and to the surprise of absolutely no one, the physical intensity was extremely high. Now at this time in NBA history, only 2 referees were assigned to work each game. Famous referee Dick Bavetta was one of them for this game, but he was a relatively new NBA referee at this point, so because of this, he was assigned to ref the game with a more experienced veteran official, Jack Madden. Early into the second half, the Boston Celtics guard Dennis Johnson dove after a loose ball and accidentally slid into Jack Madden's legs. This collision broke the veteran official's leg on impact, and as a result, he had to be carried out of the game on a stretcher. And now, the less experienced Dick Bavetta was left to officiate the game by himself. There were absolutely no reserve referees waiting in the wings. In an attempt to gain control of a chaotic basketball game, Bavetta pulled both of the team's head coaches into a huddle and asked them to keep themselves and their team on their best behavior, since he was all alone to ref the game. Both coaches agreed, but only with their words and not with their actions, as Bavetta had to give out numerous technical fouls after the huddle. Only a couple minutes into the second half, Bavetta ejected Philadelphia's head coach Billy Cunningham after he gave him what he thought was his second technical foul. The thing is, Jack Madden had given Philly's head coach a technical foul in the first half, but then decided to rescind the tech and gave it to a Philadelphia player instead, which means Dick Bavetta wrongly ejected a coach with only one technical foul. After a couple minutes, Bavetta learned of this error and had to send a staff member to get Cunningham out of the locker room so he could continue to coach the game. To put it simply, this game was already a messy circus, and emotions were obviously extremely high. But no one knew just how much worse things were about to get. It was a close game halfway into the third, but on an individual level, Larry Bird was destroying Julius Erving on both ends of the court. With 6 minutes left in the third quarter, Larry had a whopping 42 points on 74% shooting, compared to Erving, who only had 6 points on a terrible 23% shooting. And of course, you guys know Larry Bird. He was letting Erving hear about it every step of the way, trash-talking him as he buried jumper after jumper. At the rate Bird was going, a 70-point night was looking like a very realistic outcome, all while Erving was experiencing one of the worst performances of his entire career. Understandably, this whole process was incredibly frustrating to Erving. So when the two stars were battling for position down the court, Erving got right up against his body when Bird swung his elbow towards Erving in what appeared to be an attempt to clear some space. Larry was whistled for an offensive foul for the elbow, and he was irate at the call and started letting the referee hear about it. According to Julius Erving, he extended his arm towards Bird in an attempt to restrain him from the referee. Larry didn't like that very much, and before you know it, a gesture that was made in an attempt to keep the peace turned into both players literally choking each other. After the two stars had each other by the throat, Larry then took the first swing at Erving, and it was on. Moses Malone and Charles Barkley of the 76ers grabbed a hold of Bird from behind and held him in place with a headlock as Erving repeatedly punched the trapped Bird in the face. By the time the chaos had finally been put to a halt, both players had been ejected out of the game. Eventually, each star was fined $7,500 apiece for their part in the brawl. The Celtics went on to win the game 130-119 and remained undefeated. If you feel like the NBA is the same today as it was in the 80s, all you need to know in order to change your mind is that neither of these players were suspended for this vicious altercation, and Erving went as far as continuously punching a defenseless player in the face, and yet neither of them missed a game. Bird was even playing against the Washington Bullets the very next day on the second game of a back-to-back. Now take a moment to imagine something like this happening in the modern NBA. The last two championship teams meeting in the biggest game of the year, both teams being undefeated, and two of the biggest stars in the league get into an incredibly gruesome fight. It would kind of be like Giannis and LeBron getting into a brutal fight, and naturally, social media would be exploding at the event. Imagine if LeBron was consistently punching a defenseless Giannis in the face, while Anthony Davis held Giannis in place. And then on top of that, LeBron doesn't even get suspended. Obviously, this analogy doesn't totally work, as they weren't the last two champions, and they were never close to having an undefeated matchup this season. Even by the most crazy hypothetical modern comparison, it still doesn't match up to the gravity of that fight in 1984. In some ways, it really was like the Wild West in the 1980s. Now here's the thing, these two legends had to meet up again in the regular season just 1 month later. This time, on December 12, 1984, the rematch took place in the 76ers home building in Philadelphia. Obviously, everyone watching was waiting to see if there was yet another fight in store for Larry Legend and Dr. J. For the most part, everything was pretty cordial between the stars. But if Irving was hoping that this would be his revenge game where he would get the upper hand on Bird, then he was left awfully disappointed. Once again, Larry methodically picked Julius apart as he once again dominated the matchup, dropping 34 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists on 57% shooting, compared to Irving, who only dropped 16 points on 39% shooting from the field. At this point, Boston had firmly established their mental edge over the 76ers, and when these two contenders later met up in the Eastern Conference Finals, Bird once again had the upper hand, as the Celtics comfortably eliminated the 76ers in just 5 games. Although Irving might have dealt the most punishment to Bird when they physically fought, Bird never stopped abusing Irving that season in terms of the actual basketball. So what do you guys think? What would the fallout be if something like this happened in the modern NBA? Also, would you guys like this to be a series on things that would break the internet if they happened today? Let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.